Chapter 627. You can search for poisonous wife in Baidu search for the latest chapter. Looks like you've already thought of it. Lei Zhu looked at Ling Li's face and said in a deep tone, "It is the holy girl Su Li. She shouldn't exist in the world." Fate Ancestor calculated the right time, place, and people in advance and forced her to be born in Qingshui Circle. As soon as she appeared, she took away nearly half of the luck of this circle. Fortunately, she died 1,000 years ago. Otherwise, if she left Reincarnation Mirror and was used by Fate Ancestor again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Speaking of this, Thunder Ancestor sighed softly, but after his death, his fate was buried with him. The fate of Qingshui Circle was permanently reduced, and the purpose of Fate Ancestor was achieved. So that's how it is. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. It was the first time for her to hear this argument, but it was indeed reasonable. Ling Li stared at the Thunder Ancestor with cold eyes like a blade. He unconsciously clenched his fists in his sleeves and said angrily, "Su Li shouldn't exist in the world. What did she do wrong? She obviously didn't do anything." Ban Qian was surprised by Ling Li's sudden excitement. He suddenly thought of a person and looked at Ling Li, who was still angry. "Ling San, could it be, hey, that's the truth?" Seeing Ling Li's reaction, Thunder Master didn't feel strange. He saw through Ling Li's disguise at a glance. Ling Qingshui's green puppet mask was powerful, but Ling Li obviously didn't practice it well. But Lei Zhu's tone changed, and he sighed with emotion. Su Li didn't do anything wrong. She even made great contributions. If she hadn't chosen to perish in the reincarnation mirror, the cultivation world would have probably become the back garden of Fate Ancestor. Ling Li was silent, and his eyes were bloodshot. But it didn't take long for all kinds of complex anger in his heart to subside. Because he knew that Su Li could reincarnate, and it would not take long for him to get Su Li's identity in this life from the reincarnation mirror in Su Jojo's hands. In that case, Senior Fate Ancestor. Su Li's eyes were bright. If the holy girl's fate does not dissipate, and someone obtains it, and establishes a sect based on it, inviting holy sects to join, and then uses the divine water of stars, can all the substitute life poisonous insect that has not yet matured be forced out of the body? Lei Zhu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he stared at Su Li as if he wanted to see through her. But no matter how he looked, Su Li was like a mist. He couldn't see her clearly. "Little friend, if your assumption is correct." His tone softened. "It's not impossible. Lei Ancestor of the Thunder." Su Li's eyes were full of smiles. At this moment, NI sect still has the luck contained in the Tianjiao list. Maybe the effect is surprisingly good. Lei. Of Li Su, Li Shi Li. Thunder Ancestor laughed with a red face. "However, since you have taken the two divine thunders, the holy sect of Wind Thunder no longer has the divine thunders, and it exists in name only. So what if it is under the jurisdiction of NI sect from now on?" Speaking of this, he took a meaningful look at Ling Li. "I will transmit the sound to Xiongnan to explain the matter. Do we need to conceal the heavenly secrets?" Su Li leaned on the stone chair and crossed her hands on her knees. "The change of fate may be immediate, and Fate Ancestor will notice it immediately. I am not talented, but I have learned the Heaven Forbidden technique, so I can fool you for a while." Heaven Forbidden Land? The Thunder Ancestor's eyes widened, and his smile grew even brighter. "You also convinced the Holy Snow Sect?" "No, there's another reason." Su Li didn't want to say more, and the Thunder Ancestor didn't ask more. He just said, "Our Wind Thunder sect has been in Qingshui Circle for tens of thousands of years. How can we not have any foundation? We don't need to bother you to hide the secrets of heaven." At this point, the Lightning Ancestor closed his eyes. Seeing this, Su Li also closed her eyes to rest and waited quietly. Xiongnan was in seclusion when a voice transmission suddenly came. "Nana, are you there?" Hearing this extremely familiar voice, Xiongnan body trembled violently. He immediately woke up and opened his eyes. "Foster father?" "Yes, it's me." The voice of the Thunder Ancestor was a little tired. "My remnant soul body is against the secrets of heaven, so it's not appropriate to say more. This transmission is only for one thing. From now on, our Wind Thunder sect will belong to NI sect, and NI sect will be our master. don't ask more questions. You go to the Gungjin Pagoda immediately and observe Hua-Er's reaction. Belong to Ni sect. Seong Nan couldn't help but be shocked. But her foster father was the sky for her, so even if she was full of doubts, she immediately set off for the Gungjin Pagoda. At the same time, the top of the Gungjin Pagoda suddenly emitted a golden light, which covered the entire Wind Thunder sect in a few seconds. Seong Hua, who saw this scene, couldn't help but be stunned. What happened? Suddenly, Seong Hua felt nauseous, as if something was stirring in his throat. He scratched his itchy throat, and a moment later, a long white worm came out with a retch sound. The long worm seemed to be in great pain. It twisted violently on the ground for a moment, and let out a scream. Then it burst into a cloud of blood mist and drifted away. Seong Hua looked at this scene dully. After a moment, he suddenly reacted and sensed that his awareness sea had regained its freedom. He was immediately surprised and delighted. The poisonous substitute insect is dead. Eldest brother, Seong Nan, who witnessed the whole process at the door, swallowed hard and said bitterly, "What's going on?" "Alas, it's a long story." Seong Hua sighed and asked, "Why are you here?" "It's my foster father." Seong Nan immediately repeated the order of the Thunder Ancestor. Seong Hua, who knew more inside information, immediately understood that his foster father's consciousness was still there, and he met with Su Jojo. Although he didn't understand the principle, as long as the sect belonged to Ni sect, it seemed that they could get rid of the poisonous substitute insect. "Nan, don't ask so much. My foster father did the right thing." Seong Hua closed the gate of the Gungjin Pagoda and poured out all the sufferings of these years. Seong Nan knew that his eldest brother had been controlled by the Fate Palace, and he even almost lost his mind and became a puppet. Fate Ancestor. Seong Nan's eyes were burning with anger. "We choose to live in peace, but Fate Ancestor won't. As long as the Fate Palace is not eliminated, there will be no peace. Since my foster father asked us to belong to Ni sect, then we will fight. We won't stop until one of us dies." Seong Hua's eyes were full of killing intent. "We won't stop until one of us dies." In the small ownerless world, the Thunder Ancestor opened his eyes and looked at Su Li, who was still resting with her eyes closed. He smiled with relief. The new generation surpassed the old one. The nemesis of the Fate Ancestor appeared, and it was time for him to withdraw from the stage of history. It seems that Senior Thunder Ancestor has received satisfactory results. Su Li opened her eyes, and her eyes were full of divine light. "I wonder if I can stay here for 3 days. Oh. Do you want to activate the seed of Earth Thunder here?" The Thunder Ancestor raised his white eyebrows, and immediately said with a smile, "Of course. Now this place is also yours, and I am the guest. You can stay as long as you want. It happens that I am here, and you can activate the seed of Earth Thunder, which will help you." "Senior Thunder Ancestor, you are too serious." Su Li smiled sweetly. "I don't have the ambition to unify the world. How troublesome is it? As long as the Fate Ancestor is killed, Ni sect is still the Ni sect in Jojo region." The Thunder Ancestor smiled without saying a word. Time would prove this sentence. In the next 3 days, Su Li practiced in isolation, and Ban Qian left happily. Now the entire holy sect of Wind Thunder sect belonged to Ni sect, and he didn't need to worry about it anymore. In the ownerless space, only the Thunder Ancestor and Ling Li were left alone. Ling Li's state of mind had calmed down at this moment. He glanced at the dark place where Su Li practiced in isolation. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "Senior Thunder Ancestor, why do you say that? Ling Qingshui is selfish?" The Thunder Ancestor still had a smile on his face, but the smile suddenly faded. He didn't answer but asked, "How much do you know about him?" Ling Li shook his head and said in a low voice, "I know nothing." His inheritance was only about practice, and he had no impression of memory. His understanding of Ling Qingshui was still limited to what he heard and saw at the end of the divine awareness. "I only know that my father is not the lord of Shengtian Shrine, but a lord of this realm named Ling Qingshui. That's all." The Lightning Ancestor let out a long sigh. "If I were to tell you that the Great War back then was largely because of you, what would you think?" Ling Li's eyes changed. "Why do you say that?" Su Jojo's refining has just begun, and I still have time. Well, I'll tell you. The Thunder Ancestor summoned a stone chair and sat down again. His turbid eyes were dim. I swore that if I met you, I would definitely kill you to comfort the souls of my old friends who died in the war. But this information has long faded with my death. You were just a baby in swaddling clothes at that time, so it's not your fault. Ling Li took a light breath and sat beside the Thunder Ancestor. He said in a deep voice, I'd like to hear the details. In fact, for Qingshui Circle, both your father and Bai Mo are outsiders. The words of the Thunder Ancestor were earth-shattering, which made Ling Li stop breathing. Ling Qingshui was not from Qingshui Circle. Seeing Ling Li's reaction, the Thunder Ancestor couldn't help but smile and continued, but you were born in Qingshui Circle. Your mother was the lord of Wanling Palace, and then disappeared. Wanling Palace? Ling Li's thoughts were a little chaotic, but it didn't prevent him from asking, I know that before Qingshui calendar, it was the Wanling calendar. Yes. The Thunder Ancestor's eyes flashed with respect. Wanling Palace once ruled this circle for hundreds of thousands of years, and it was the real overlord. Later, the whole palace disappeared for no reason. I suspect that it has something to do with your father. It's just that the secret has passed for tens of thousands of years, and no one knows the reason. Seeing Ling Li fall into silence, the Thunder Ancestor continued, after Bai Mo appeared, he slaughtered several big regions as soon as he appeared. One of them was the prefecture next to Jojo region. Ling Qingshui was the lord of Qingshui Circle at that time, so he naturally had to take the responsibility of protecting Qingshui Circle. At that time, he ordered all sects in the world to merge into Qingshui Palace and form a crusade army to destroy the Palace of Demons. But Bai Mo had already escaped, and no one knew where he was hiding. At that time, Wanling Palace disappeared and your mother disappeared. Ling Qingshui took you alone and chased after Bai Mo. But later, I don't know what evil method Bai Mo used, and he bewitched the natural law of this circle to deal with Ling Qingshui. Speaking of this, the Thunder Ancestor's face darkened. At that time, we knew that Ling Qingshui was not a person of this circle, so Bai Mo took the opportunity to kill Ling Qingshui with the Thunder of Destruction. But Ling Qingshui was an immortal after all. Even if he didn't have the Thunder of Tranquility, the Thunder of Destruction could only hurt him, but not kill him. That battle shattered the mountains and rivers, and darkened the sky and the earth. In the end, it ended with both sides suffering losses. Chapter 628. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. And then, Ling Li couldn't help but ask, why didn't you pursue White Demon when he was injured? After White Demon was injured, he disappeared. No one knows where he is hiding. Thunder Ancestor's voice was very low. At that time, your father was seriously injured, and it was difficult to heal because of the malice of natural law in this circle. At that time, you were just born, and you were also hostile to natural law. You were in danger of dying immediately. Speaking of this, Thunder Ancestor slowed down his tone and stared at Ling Li. Immortals do have incredible means to seal you for a long time. You will stay at 1 year old forever until the seal loses its effectiveness due to time. Time is a sharp weapon that even natural law can't resist. As long as the time is long enough, your existence will be forgotten by natural law, and there will be no danger of dying. But this skill is against nature. The effect only has a great impact on Ling Qingshui's strength, and may even affect the war. At that time, Ling Qingshui was in a dilemma. He could only choose between Qingshui Circle and you. No one knew his situation at that time. Now it seems that he chose you. Ling Li's eyes were sore, as if he could see the indomitable man in those days. After his wife suddenly disappeared, he still had to fight desperately with White Demon. After being seriously injured, he gently picked him up with a tender face. After sealing him, he resolutely left. It turned out that the Lord of Shengtian Shrine was just a vampire built by a pile of lies. It turned out that his father had always loved him, and could even let everyone down for him. Later, White Demon hid behind the scenes and made the poisonous substitute, which made the coalition of Qingshui Palace fall apart instantly. Qingshui Circle began to be in chaos for hundreds of years. After the divine water of stars was made, the chaos subsided. But at that time, Qingshui Circle was already in misery and suffering. Countless cultivation inheritances were destroyed, which led to the fault of cultivation methods. But the fault at that time was not as serious as it is now. White Demon is very patient. Even though he has the advantage, he doesn't rush for instant benefits. He wasted 1,000 years of your father's life. When your father's injuries worsened, even we could sense his otherworldly bloodline, and the apocalyptic thunder tribulation descended. In one night, the Green Water Palace was destroyed, but at that time, your father had already moved all his clansmen away. The heavenly axiom was furious and poured all its anger on your father. At that time, your father's strength was less than 1/100th of his original strength. Coupled with the suppression of the otherworld, how could he be a match for the heavenly axiom? The Thunder Ancestor didn't say anything else. He found that Ling Li's eyes were red. The father and son, separated for tens of thousands of years, didn't know each other's hearts until today. Back then, he was still young and had not adopted Xianghua and Xiongnan. Naturally, he hated Ling Qingshui's actions. But now, he had tasted what it was like to be a father. How could he not know Ling Qingshui's hardship and sadness? Although he was strong enough to be above the whole world, he was still a poor man. Where are my father's remains? It was the first time for him to call Ling Qingshui father, but he was not unaccustomed to it at all. He even felt that he couldn't repay his debt to his father in this life. The Thunder Ancestor shook his head. No one knows. Ling Qingshui's immortal bones were definitely not destroyed. But after the Thunder Doom, nothing was left. At that time, the Ghost King of the Ghost Clan built a cenotaph for him, which is in the ghost region of Han sect today. Later, the cenotaph was probably gone because of the appearance of the ice demon in the old haunt of the Ghost Clan. Ling Li took a deep breath and clearly heard the drumming sound of the blood in his heart. The golden blood was the symbol of the son of an immortal. He didn't practice much during this time, but his strength directly broke through the Darching realm and reached the Junior Emperor realm by relying on the bloodline. It could be imagined how powerful his father was at that time. But such a powerful father was defeated by White Demon's intrigue after all. I will atone for my father's sins. For the creatures of Qingshui Circle, to eliminate White Demon. The Thunder Ancestor shook his head and laughed. You are too weak. But if you have time, it's hard to say. You were born in this world, and Qingshui Circle is your mother world. You don't have the defects of your father. If you can become an immortal, White Demon is definitely not your opponent. But, become an immortal. The Thunder Ancestor's eyes showed helplessness, and his voice was ethereal. It's hard. No matter how much time it takes. The killing intent in Ling Li's eyes soared. Whether it was for his father or Li, he swore to kill White Demon. Haha, good. What you lack most is time. The Thunder Ancestor pointed to Su Li. Compared with you, she has a higher probability of success, which is why I bet on her. Her strength and influence were completely formed in just a few years, which was so fast that even White Demon didn't fully react. If you want to kill White Demon, following her is indeed the best way. Why does Su Jojo fight against the Life Palace? Seeing that the Thunder Ancestor was not surprised, Ling Li couldn't help but ask. She is a rare genius in tens of thousands of years and a junior emperor realm at the age of 100. As long as she is given time, she can become an immortal in a short time. Why does she ask for trouble? This was what he couldn't figure out the most. Su Jojo could be regarded as an Evildor among Evilders in both strength and wisdom. But why did such a woman have to face such a powerful opponent as White Demon when she was weak? Ha ha ha, boy, you are so naive. Do you think you are the only victim in the world? The Thunder Ancestor smiled meaningfully. Su Jojo's hatred for White Demon is no less than yours. What's more, as long as White Demon knows her existence and her potential and horror, he will kill her. Fortunately, she is patient enough to show up in front of the world until the Ni sect becomes a great power. With Kai Tian of the Chimo Circle, White Demon can do nothing. Speaking of this, the Thunder Ancestor got up, and the illusory shadow sank into the darkness. I have said all that should be said. I will go to see Su Jojo. Do as you wish. Ling Li took a deep look at Su Jojo's silhouette in the darkness, and his eyes flickered. What will your hatred be? 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. A light flashed outside the mountain guarding matrix of the holy sect of Wind Thunder, and 2 figures were spat out. With a flash of earthy light in her eyes, Su Li bowed to the mountain guarding matrix, and then turned away without saying a word. Seeing this, Ling Li immediately followed. Su Jojo, you. Su Li paused, turned her head, and said expressionlessly, I will give you the reincarnation mirror before smelting the divine thunder of the 5 elements. Are you satisfied? Ling Li was shocked, and forgot to say what he originally said. Seeing this, Su Li sneered, and her figure flashed away quickly, leaving only an afterimage of a black skirt. I am just worried about your safety. If Su Jojo died in the fusion of the 5 thunders, it would be a pity. He had never been able to understand Su Jojo's thoughts. Ling Li sighed, and his figure flashed into the sky to follow her. The black skirt just now was inexplicably familiar, but his heart was full of helplessness for Su Jojo's misunderstanding, so he didn't think much. Well, after arriving at the Tsiyun house and getting the reincarnation mirror, everything would be considered in the long run. Ding, ding, ding. In the center of the Life Palace, the small golden tower suddenly began to jingle, and the picture loomed. Does the image of fate begin to emerge? Hee. The low laughter wandered in the darkness. Death is coming. How will you choose? Qingshui Nun. Senior Sister Apprentice Holy Maiden. Senior Sister Apprentice. Xian Yu heard the hurried shouts outside, and suddenly woke up from meditation. She picked up the token given by the master beside her, hurriedly opened the door, and asked, How is it, Junior Sister Apprentice? Has the master's wife come out? The Junior Sister Apprentice nodded repeatedly. I heard the sound. Hurry up. Oh. Xian Yu immediately turned into a sword light, and rushed into the place of practice at the fastest speed. Sure enough, when she saw the door of the cave in the center was wide open, she looked happy. She tidied up her messy clothes, walked in, and shouted, Master's wife, call Chue Zi. Come here. Xian Yu turned her gaze and saw a woman in red, who looked to be in her 30s, reclining on a soft couch made of unknown fur. She was holding a tobacco pipe in her hand, and her snow-white skin was even more enchanting in the smoke. Master's wife. Xian Yu jumped in front of the woman obediently, and carefully covered the woman's clothes. Master's wife, you wear so little again. Master will be angry if he sees you. That bastard. The woman rolled her eyes, and her red lips opened slightly. He only knows how to hide in his hometown, motionless like an old turtle. He hasn't come to see me for a long time, and he still dares to be angry. As she said, the woman suddenly threw away the tobacco pipe, and pulled Xian Yu's face with both hands. She pulled Xian Yu's face with both hands, and said, Our Yu is the best. You know to come to see Master's wife. Oh, Master's wife, don't make trouble. Xian Yu quickly broke away, and handed the token to the woman. This is from Master. When the woman saw the token, she immediately restrained her flippant look, and became quite solemn. Isn't this bastard always cautious? Why is he so reckless this time? What's the background of Su Jojo? Well, I don't know. Xian Yu said dryly. Seeing that the master's wife's face fell, she immediately added, But he is the benefactor in Master's divination, and the only feeling I have when I touch him is, amazing, so strong. The woman raised her eyebrows, stronger than me? But he is only the first on the Tianjiao list, and I have also won it. But he forcibly arranged 4 people of Ni sect to be on the list, which is really an eye-opener for me. Oh, Master's wife, I know you are powerful. If you are not too lazy to fight, even those from holy sects may not be your opponent. But this is not the time to fight fiercely. Xian Yu pursed her lips. This is a dead test, a dead test. You have to take it seriously. The woman waved her sleeves, and said with a strange smile, Isn't it just the heart and fate-alike lock? You were too young back then, and now you regret it. If I die, that bastard will also be buried with me. Why are you so nervous? Alas, Master is also suffering. Damn it. The woman suddenly got up and swayed to the door of the cave. With her back to Xian Yu, she looked at the sky outside, and her domineering voice suddenly became cold. You leave here first. Xian Yuer's body stiffened. None. You, come out? Chapter 629. You can search poisonous wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. The woman turned around and looked down at her clothes. She frowned slightly, but didn't say much. She just shook her body and changed the revealing red dress into a green-brown Taoist robe. She made a Taoist salute with one hand, and a horsetail whisk appeared in her other hand. Her eyes were elegant and natural, as if nothing could affect her mind. How long have I been sleeping? Xian Yu braced herself and replied, I just arrived. Her heart thumped. Why did Qingshui Nun wake up at this time? If Su Jouzhou came, wouldn't she run into trouble? Don't you know? Qingshui Nun looked cold and walked out of the cave. Xian Yu quickly followed. Nun, your soul is weak. Don't walk around. I'm afraid that if I don't come out for a walk, I will never come out. Qingshui Nun said calmly. When the little junior sister saw her, she suddenly widened her eyes and was surprised and happy. Master, you wake up. It's been 900 years. Huan Qingshui Nun's cold eyes were a little warmer. How was everything during my sleep? Huan nodded and held Qingshui Nun's arm. While talking, Xian Yu followed silently with a worried look. Everything is fine in the sect, but it's not peaceful outside. By the way, Master, the Tianjiao battle has just ended. Huan chattered. It was rare to see her master wake up, so she seemed to have endless words. She talked about the major events in the past 900 years in one breath. Fate Ancestor can't do anything to Su Jouzhou. It's not easy. Qingshui Nun's expression seemed to never change. She said at a constant speed, if possible, I want to see her. Huan didn't know about the dead-end test, nor did she know that Xian Yu had contact with Su Jouzhou. She just nodded and said, I heard that Su Jouzhou is less than 100 years old, and her cultivation is only at the peak of Yuanying realm, but her combat power is comparable to a junior emperor. She is so talented, but her mind and strategy are even more powerful. NI sect has become more and more powerful, but the Fate Palace has no response. She should be afraid. Never underestimate the Fate Ancestor. Qingshui Nun scolded. Exhaustion flashed in her eyes. Half of the blood stained her eyes, but she forced it back down. She said lightly, I just came out for a breath of fresh air. Can't you wait a little longer? Master, your divine soul, Huan asked worriedly. Qingshui Nun pulled up the corners of her mouth, revealing an abnormal smile. Master and disciple comforted, it's okay. Master will always be with you. Huan's eyes turned red. Xian Yu and her master's wife had a secret, and so did she and her master. The Fate Ancestor had planted the substitute life Gu in his master's soul. Although the heavenly star divine water had recovered, it had also caused irreversible damage. His soul was weak and he fell into a long coma. If he continued to remain unconscious, it was only a matter of time before he died. At that time, the Heavenly Star Valley Master's Tao companion had lost her physical body. However, because she cultivated in the divine soul technique, even if she lost her physical body, she was still alive. However, because her cultivation was too strong, an ordinary physical body could not withstand it. The Heavenly Star Valley Master came up with a way to replace his Tao companion's divine soul with the Master's ocean of consciousness. The two coexisted, and the Master's divine soul could also be nourished by Tao. It was killing two birds with one stone. It was true. After 10,000 years, the interval between the Master's awakening was getting shorter and shorter, which proved that the divine soul was recovering. The Master was getting better, but she didn't know if she could wait for the next time the Master woke up. Although she called Xian Yu a senior sister apprentice, she still looked like a teenager, and even the measured bone age was also a teenager, but in fact, she was more than 13,000 years old. Her time had stopped since 10,000 years ago, and her cultivation had stopped at 3,000 years old forever. The lifespan of a person in the nature's test realm was only 15,000 years. Your incantation is still there, which means that the thousand-faced demon girl, who cooperated with the Fate Ancestor, is still in this world, but I don't know where she is hiding. If you can kill her, With the foundation you have accumulated in the past 10,000 years, you will definitely directly enter the half-emperor realm, or even higher. Qingshui Nun comforted her with a voice transmission. Don't be afraid. Master will help you. Huana was silent. How could the master help her when she was extremely weak? The thousand-faced demon girl was a half-emperor 10,000 years ago, and her means were evil and vicious. Now, after 10,000 years of accumulation, she must be more powerful. Who could be her opponent? At this moment, an old woman in the same Taoist robe came in a hurry. Seeing Qingshui Nun in the courtyard, she was surprised. Grandmaster Qingshui, you are awake? Qingshui Nun nodded. Chuhi, you have worked hard these years. It's my duty. Grandmaster, what are you talking about? Speaking of this, the old woman suddenly said, by the way, Grand Elder, you happened to wake up. I can't make up my mind, so Su Jojo comes to visit our house and wants to borrow the most precious treasure, perfect chakra. Grandmaster, what do you think? Su Jojo? Qingshui Nun was surprised. She was just talking about this woman with Huan Er. She didn't expect that the devil would come when they talked about it. I want to see her in person. That's great. Huan Er also wants to see this Evildor. Seeing Qingshui Nun and others walking out of the courtyard, Shen Yue almost cried out. How could it be such a coincidence? In the front hall of Ziyun House, after serving tea, Su Li heard a series of footsteps after waiting for a while. She looked back and saw a group of people walking into the room. The head of Ziyun House was the second one, and the leader was a Taoist nun who looked no more than 30 years old. Grand Elder Qingshui? Ling Li was surprised. He had heard a lot of rumors about Grand Elder Qingshui. It was said that she was possessed by the devil in practice. Sometimes she was sober, and sometimes she was crazy. Now it seemed that she was sober. They were lucky. I'm Su Jojo. Are you Grand Elder Qingshui? Su Li got up and lowered her head slightly to show respect. Grand Elder Qingshui turned her face expressionlessly, walked to the center of the hall, and sat down. She said first, the most precious treasure of Ziyun House will never be lent to outsiders. As soon as she said this, Su Jojo frowned slightly, and Ling Li's face was slightly gloomy. It seemed that she was not very lucky. Shen Yue heard this, and everything went dark in front of her. It was over. According to Su Jojo's bad temper, even the master couldn't do anything to her. If Qingshui Nun confronted her head-on, she would be doomed. Su Li sipped the tea and smiled peacefully. Now is different from the past. I see that your soul is weak. If I can help you recover immediately, will you still lend me your perfect chakra? Will you still lend me your perfect chakra? As soon as she said this, Huan Er's eyes immediately lit up. Qingshui Nun was calm when she heard this. She slowly put down the horsetail whisk in her hand, and said slowly, as the sixth-generation successor of Ziyun House, I can't violate the ancestral teachings. Su Li frowned, and finally felt that Qingshui Nun was difficult to deal with. Then what do you want to lend the most precious treasure to outsiders? If Qingshui Circle falls, your Ziyun House can't be alone, right? Qingshui Nun closed her eyes. Taoism follows the natural law. Everything in the world can't be forced. Donor, please go back. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became stagnant. Su Li put down the cup, smiled slightly, and got up. Then, I'm leaving. After that, she turned around and left. Shen Yu was anxious and caught up with her. Grand Elder Su, don't leave in a hurry. Listen to me. Ling Li sat in the hall and stared at Qingshui Nun, who was still indifferent. He said softly, I hope you won't regret it in the future. After that, he also got up and left. Huan wanted to persuade him to stay, but Qingshui Nun pulled her sleeve. Master. Huan was anxious immediately. Qingshui Nun suddenly opened her eyes, and her pupils were instantly stained with blood. Her Taoist robe turned into a red one. I can't stand it anymore. Qingshui, you damn Taoist nun, why are you still so pretentious at this time? Huan only saw a red shadow flashed in front of her, and then she lost the figure of her master. Goddess of Blood God, Huan looked at the figure that rushed out at a rapid speed, and felt grateful. Sometimes, her master was pedantic and cared about her face. If she could have a little bit of the forthrightness of goddess of blood god, maybe they wouldn't have fallen into such a situation that year. Xian Yu just caught up to the front of the mountain gate, and saw that Su Li had already stepped out of the mountain-protecting tactical matrix. She was burning with anxiety. But at this moment, there was an explosion in the sky. Wait, Su Jojo, stop. Su Li stopped and looked stunned for a moment. This voice belonged to Qing Shui? Why did it feel like a different person? A red shadow flashed, and Qing Shui had already surpassed Su Li and stood in front of her. She stared at Su Li breathlessly and smiled. Jojo, don't rush to go. Let me entertain you well. You can use the nuisance wheel at will. I won't complain even if you break it. Speaking of this, cyan anger appeared in Qing Shui's eyes again. Shuiying, Ziyun House is not your blood god sect. You shut up. The blood in the eyes of the red dress rose, and instantly drowned the cyan color. It turns out to be two souls. Su Li suddenly saw through Qing Shui in front of her. Master's wife, you come out. That's great. Xian Yu breathed a sigh of relief. She excitedly walked to the woman in the red dress and apologized. Sorry, Grand Elder Su. My master's wife and Qing Shui nun share a physical body. Qing Shui nun is old-fashioned and pedantic, but she actually hopes that someone can stand up to fight against the fate ancestor. You don't have to worry about the treasure of Ziyun House. My master's wife can make the decision. So, shall we go into the hall to talk in detail? Su Li said with a smile. Xian Yu saw that she was not angry, and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Grand Elder Su, please come in. Ling Li looked at this scene strangely, and then looked at the revealing clothes of Qing Shui in the red dress. He couldn't help but think that rumors were harmful. Su Jojo returned to the hall and couldn't help but smile bitterly when she saw that her grand elder had become goddess of blood god again. Why are you just looking at me? Why aren't you taking out that wheel yet? Shui Ying leaned on the soft couch without caring about her image. She casually took out a cigarette stick and rolled her eyes to Chu He, the current master of Ziyun House. Chu He smiled bitterly and looked at Huan. Huan was silent for a moment and nodded. She couldn't continue to be pedantic like her master, which would only harm others and herself. That's right. Shui Ying nodded with satisfaction. Huan, learn more from me and be more open-minded. If people are autistic, they are no different from salted fish. Shui Ying. Chapter 630. You can search poisonous wife in Baidu. You can search for the latest chapter. Ha ha ha, you don't want to listen to me? Blood Cherry sneered. Damn Taoist nun, you have been an eyesore for a long time. If Bai Xiu didn't want to save you, wouldn't it be better for me to take over the body of Fate Ancestor's lackey? The cyan light flickered in Blood Cherry's eyes. After a while, she seemed to be unable to quarrel with Blood Cherry and finally fell into silence. At this moment, Chu He came into the hall with a colorless origin wheel. She smiled bitterly and said, Fellow Daoist Su, this is the treasure of our sect, the perfect wheel. However, only Grand Elder Qing Shui knows how to use it. The implication was that if Grand Elder Qing Shui didn't agree, no one could use the treasure. Is that so? Xian Yu didn't expect it, and Blood Cherry was also embarrassed. Su Li frowned slightly and was about to speak, but Huan suddenly stood up and said, It's okay, I can use it too. Chu He was stunned and blurted out, Youngest grandaunt, your identity, youngest grandaunt? Xian Yu looked at Huan's childish face in amazement. Huan, aren't you a junior sister apprentice? It doesn't make much sense to hide my identity. Huan smiled and looked up to Xian Yu. I heard what you said to Goddess of Blood God. Since it is a dead end, it is also my master's dead end. I can't sit back and do nothing. Speaking of this, Huan looked at Su Li. The perfect will is quite complicated to operate. Grand Elder Su, would you like to go to the cave with me to talk about it? Of course. Su Li chuckled, and Huan beckoned the wheel to fall into her hand. She nodded to the crowd and said, Everyone, excuse us. Su Li glanced at Ling Li and transmitted the sound in silence. I won't use the wheel immediately. You can wait for a few days in Ziyun House, or you can do your own things and come back in 2 days. Ling Li nodded slightly. He wouldn't leave. The whereabouts of Li's reincarnation was the top priority. Alas, in the end, I still can't help. With a flick of the blood cherry smoke pipe, it got up and swayed back to the cave residence. Xian Yu hurriedly followed. They couldn't stay idle. Although they didn't know how the death calamity would descend, it was always good to be prepared. In the blink of an eye, only Ling Li and the head of the Tsiyun house were left. Chu He smiled politely and said, Master, how about moving to the guest room? Ling Li breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. The Taoist nun of the Merciful Cloud House had a pure heart and few desires. She was not as gossipy as the Grand Elder of the Wind Thunder Sacred Sect. While he was thinking about this, Chu He suddenly turned around and asked with a smile, "May I ask, young hero, who are you to Grand Elder Su?" Ling Li. On the other side, Su Li and Huan walked together. Speaking of which, fellow practitioner Su, since you are related to the Skystar Valley, then, you should know some secrets about the era of the Lord of Qingshui Circle, right? Su Li admitted frankly, yes, but I haven't experienced it personally. Huana smiled embarrassedly. You could tell? Yes. Su Li said softly, if I am right, you are approaching the end of your life. Yes, Huana recalled, 10,000 years have passed in the blink of an eye. The catastrophe of that year seems to have happened yesterday. It is so clear. The natural law's means of erasing memories are really horrible. But sects like us all have profound foundation and always have some trump cards. Therefore, behind every powerful sage sect, there would always be a few existences who knew the truth. But, after another 10,000 years, the traces of the truth will be fewer and fewer. Speaking of this, Huana looked worried. She stopped and looked directly at Su Li. In fact, we don't have much time, do we? Su Li was silent for a moment and nodded gently. Then hurry up. I will teach you how to use the wheel. Although this treasure is in the hands of my master, you can use it freely with my help after she falls into a deep sleep. I will tell the goddess of blood god and try not to let my master come out and mess things up. Thank you. Su Li nodded and said. Then her eyes flashed. What is the background of the goddess of blood god? The goddess of blood god is the cultivation companion of the lord of Tianqing Valley, and also, the old ancestor of the blood god sect. Huana smiled helplessly. The goddess of blood god doesn't forbid killing. The sect is also between good and evil, which is almost the opposite of my master's idea. I used to have a lot of misunderstandings about her. But after 10,000 years of contact, I have completely changed my mind about her. I even envy her a little. If I can do what I want, maybe I won't end up like this. The blood god sect. Su Li remembered the Shuarine bandits she had met in the Tianjiao battle. Is the blood god sect still there? No. Huana's eyes were full of respect, and she said cautiously, the people of the blood god sect are all like the goddess of blood god. They don't hold back when dealing with the Fate Palace, so they were specially targeted by the Fate Ancestor. They were all wiped out. The goddess of blood god also lost her physical body at that time. She seems to be carefree, but in fact, she occasionally shows sadness and guilt over the years. She probably feels sorry for the dead people of the sect if she is still alive. Speaking of this, Huana paused, and her expression showed coldness for the first time. I don't know if anyone has told you that in addition to the Fate Ancestor, there is another person you need to pay attention to. 10,000 years ago, she was called the Thousand-Faced Witch, and my curse was planted by her. Su Li's eyes flickered. Almost instantly, she thought of what Fang Ling had warned her back then. Could Fang Ling's master and the Thousand-Faced Witch be the same person? The Thousand-Faced Witch. No one knows what she looks like. However, her reputation had spread far and wide. Many of the Fate Palace's sinister schemes were her handiwork. Moreover, she also contributed to the refining of the poisonous substitute life insect. If it weren't for her, the Fate Ancestor wouldn't have escaped from Qingshui Palace Lord so easily. Huana sighed softly. That's all I know. I hope I can bring you some help. As she said, she made a gesture with both hands, and the complete wheel immediately lit up with white light and floated between the two of them. Now I will transfer my mark of recognition to you. It will take about a day. Huana's voice gradually faded, and she was immersed in the stripping of the mark. While Su Li was still receiving the mark in the Tsiyun house, Xiong Hua, who was far away in the holy sect of Wind Thunder, was running around. After being tortured by the poisonous substitute life insect for hundreds of years, he actually joined a small secret circle. In this circle, there were 20 elders or grand elders of holy sects who had not yet surrendered to the Fate Palace. It was said that this circle had been established after the destruction of the Qingshui Palace, and it had a history of more than 10,000 years. It had a unique space that could temporarily isolate the influence of the poisonous substitute life insect, and could also monitor the degree of a person being poisoned by the poisonous substitute life insect by unique means. They called this circle removing the poisonous substitute life insect. The meaning was simple and straightforward. The purpose was to find a way to get rid of the poisonous substitute life insect with the efforts of everyone one day. It was said that there were 50 or 60 people in this circle at its peak, including 80% of the forces of holy sects. But later, as the holy sects were infiltrated by the Fate Palace one by one, the number of people became fewer and fewer. The Grand Elder of Meizong used to be one of them, and he had seen him. Unfortunately, he heard that the Grand Elder was beyond cure and was directly kicked out of the circle. So, when Su Jojo told him about the Grand Elder of Meizong, he had no doubt. At the same time, because of the isolated space here, he could take a gamble when Su Li used the means to isolate the influence of the poisonous substitute life insect. Fortunately, his gamble paid off. After the ecstasy, he immediately began to summon the members of removing the poisonous substitute life insect. He also knew that this matter was of great importance, so everything was carried out in secret. It took 7 or 8 days to summon all the members in secret. The isolated place was hidden in a very small mortal village. It was just a courtyard surrounded by a simple fence, but every table, chair, and stone was placed in a very particular way, which coincided with the natural law. At this moment, in the usually empty courtyard, men, women, old and young entered one after another. The mortals living in the village seemed to not see them at all, and continued to live as usual. When the last person arrived, Xiong Hua, who had been waiting at the table in the courtyard for a long time, suddenly opened his eyes and looked solemn. "Everyone, long time no see." The white-haired old woman standing at the outermost of the courtyard, holding a crutch, said unhappily, "Xiong Hua, you know that Ni sect and the Life Palace are confronting each other now, and it is a sensitive period. Why do you still use the most advanced carrier rune to summon us?" "Yes, Xiong Hua." Another grand elder of a holy sect also said in a deep voice, "We have discussed before that we should not meet for nearly 1,000 years. Why do you summon us in such a hurry? What's the matter?" Xiong Hua looked at the unhappy faces of everyone, but he still smiled. "Before talking, let's swear according to the old rules." The white-haired old woman and others looked slightly relaxed, and the doubts in their hearts were slightly relieved. Since Xiong Hua was still willing to swear, he was still sober and not completely eroded by the poisonous substitute life insect. Their words were overbearing, undoubtedly wanting to probe Xiong Hua's situation. Since the establishment of removing the poisonous insect, there had been a crisis of information leakage, and they were even cleaned up by the Life Palace. Fortunately, no matter how heavy the casualties were, this circle still existed, and the rule of blood curse oath was born. "I, Xiong Hua, hereby make a blood curse oath. If half of what I said today is passed into the Life Palace, I will be sucked dry by the curse power, and my soul and body will be tortured to death." As soon as Xiong Hua's voice fell, a blood-colored rune was automatically condensed in the nothingness and engraved on the back of Xiong Hua's hand. When Xiong Hua finished, everyone followed him to swear. Looking at their proficiency, it was obviously not the first time. For existences at the junior emperor level like them, it was a shame to entrust their lives to the oath, but they, who were parasitized by the poisonous substitute life insect, were no longer qualified to talk about shame. When everyone finished swearing, Xiong Hua's suppressed joy suddenly overflowed, and his voice was trembling with excitement. "Everyone, my poisonous substitute life insect has been removed." As soon as he said this, the audience was silent, and only dozens of sudden rapid breathing sounds could be heard. What did you say?" The white-haired old woman's voice was hoarse. She was the grand elder of the sage sect who was the closest to being completely eroded. She had given up hope, and today she followed the rules of the circle to go through the formalities, but she did not expect Seonghua. A big smile appeared on Seonghua's face. Although I don't know what the principle is, this method was taught by my adoptive father. You guys can try it. Chapter 631. You can search poisonous wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. What's the way? Seonghua, tell us quickly. No matter what, we have to try. After the shock, everyone asked one after another. Seonghua had expected this and quickly appeased them. Don't be impatient, everyone. The method is very simple. I will tell you everything in detail. This matter has a lot to do with Ni sect. If you get rid of the poisonous substitute at the same time, even if there is a tactical matrix to isolate heaven and earth left by a senior, it will inevitably be noticed by Fate Ancestor. At that time, our advantage will be gone. Seonghua's words calmed everyone down. Grand Elder Seonghua, tell us. We are not young people. We have experienced ups and downs over the years, and we have already seen through it. Tell us first, what should we do? The white-haired old woman was so excited that her eyes were slightly red, and her tone was still calm. Seonghua immediately described what he had encountered, including the instructions of Thunder Ancestor and the change of getting rid of the poisonous substitute. Fellow practitioner Seonghua, do you mean that as long as we sincerely submit to Ni sect and Sujojo, we can force out the poisonous substitute? Someone couldn't help frowning. What's the reason? Seonghua nodded, and then shook his head. I don't know the principle. But we have also studied it in the past. The poisonous substitute seems to be related to the illusory fate. Sujojo won 4 positions in the top 10 of Tianjiao list. Her luck is unprecedented. Although we had some guesses at the time, how can the poisonous spell and the fate spell be related? Some people were tempted, and some doubted. For a while, everyone fell into silence. Only the white-haired old woman took a deep breath and stood up. Since we are not sure, why not try it? I don't have much time left, so I will explore the way for you. Senior Feng Shi. As soon as these words came out, many people were moved, but Seonghua comforted her with a smile. Senior Feng Shi, you will be glad that you made the decision. The white-haired old woman nodded. Although Seonghua was an example, as long as it didn't happen to her or she saw it with her own eyes, it was always hard to believe. The white-haired old woman took a breath and said loudly, I, Feng Shi, on behalf of Fenglin Palace, sincerely submit to Ni sect in Jojo region. I will respect the Grand Elder of Ni sect and Sujojo as my master. I will never regret it. As soon as he said that, many people's expressions changed. Patriarch Phoenix Stream is going all out this time. She's not leaving any room for retreat. What other way does she have? Either she gets rid of the substitute GU, or she dies. Phoenix Forest Palace will also perish along with her, falling into a desperate situation. Holding his breath, Seonghua stared at Patriarch Phoenix Stream nervously. He didn't understand the theory behind it, so he wasn't sure he could succeed. But he had come anyway. Even if it was just for the slightest possibility, he had to try. 1 breath, 2 breaths, dozens of breaths passed, but nothing happened. Patriarch Phoenix Stream's face turned deathly pale. This was her last hope, but it didn't work. Impossible. How did it fail? Seonghua couldn't believe it. Why hadn't Patriarch Phoenix Stream reacted when he had succeeded? What did I miss? Forget it, this is my fate. Patriarch Phoenix Stream's eyes dimmed, as if he had lost his spirit, chi, and spirit, and looked even older. Suddenly, she let out a muffled groan, and her eyes turned white as she fell to the ground, twitching violently. Not good. Everyone's expression changed dramatically. Patriarch Phoenix Stream is going to be completely eroded. Seonghua was alarmed and anxious. Hurry. Let's work together to suppress her. Patriarch Chen Su, who was on good terms with Patriarch Phoenix Stream, bellowed angrily, Save her. Who can suppress her? No matter what, we have to try. Otherwise, what happened to Patriarch Phoenix Stream today will be our tomorrow. His words seemed to work. A female patriarch in the crowd had a resolute look in her eyes. Without a word, she took out a white porcelain bottle, opened it, and poured Patriarch Phoenix Stream's water into it. It's said that back when Chanyik Attic roamed the cultivation world in Heavenly Star Valley, he publicized the method of making Heavenly Star divine water in an attempt to weaken the Life Palace's influence. I've been preparing some for years, but it's not very effective. Now I can only try it as a last resort. The female patriarch put away the jade bottle and stared at Patriarch Phoenix Stream nervously. However, Patriarch Phoenix Stream's trembling didn't stop. Instead, it became more violent, and she started foaming at the mouth. How can this be? The female patriarch murmured to herself. Patriarch Chen Su turned his head and covered his face with his hand, speechless. Let her die in peace, another patriarch said with a sigh. One of the ancestors sighed. She'll become a puppet of the Life Palace in a moment. I'm sure she doesn't want that to happen. It's better for her to die peacefully. This is what we all have to face. Xiong Hua's eyes were filled with self-blame. If he hadn't acted rashly, Grand Elder Phoenix Stream might have been able to hold on for a while longer. However, it didn't seem to make much sense. Let me do it. I'll pierce her sea of consciousness with my sword. That way, she won't feel any pain. A middle-aged man walked out with a sword in his hand, his expression solemn. He made a seal with one hand, and the flying sword immediately shot out of his hand. Just as it was about to pierce through Patriarch Phoenix Stream's head, puff, an old hand suddenly grabbed the flying sword. The owner of this hand was Feng Shi. She slowly sat up, her white hair disheveled. The middle-aged man's expression changed. Patriarch Phoenix Stream, how can you be so fast? Everyone shivered and took out their magic treasures. Just as they were about to cast spells, they heard a faint sound coming from within the white hair. Wait, I haven't been invaded yet, wretch. Before Patriarch Phoenix Stream could finish speaking, she suddenly felt nauseous. Propping herself up on the ground, she vomited. An unpleasant stench spread in the small space. But everyone seemed to smell the most delicious smell in the world, and they all stared at Patriarch Phoenix Stream without blinking. Crack! A white bug half an inch thicker than an arm fell to the ground, mixed with saliva. Then, with a shrill shriek, it exploded into a bloody mist. Seeing this, Xiong Hua finally relaxed, and a smile appeared on his face. Patriarch Phoenix Stream stared blankly at the bloodstain caused by the GU substitution bug. The pressure in her sea of consciousness was gone. After thousands of years, she finally experienced the long-lost, unprecedented relief. I'm really cured. Her voice trembled as she collapsed on the ground, completely disregarding her image. Everyone's eyes were sore, but they were also very excited. The hard truth was right in front of them, and they had to believe it. As long as they submitted to NI sect, they really had a chance to get rid of the GU substitution bug. I seem to understand now. The eyes of the female old ancestor who gave her the divine water of divine stars lit up. Patriarch Phoenix Stream, the luck of your Phoenix Forest Palace is still not as good as that of the holy sect of Wind Thunder. You are still a little bit away from suppressing the GU substitution bug by submitting to NI sect. The divine water of divine stars is extremely effective in suppressing the GU substitution bug. At this point, the female patriarch's smile widened. Congratulations, Patriarch Phoenix Stream. Haha, Patriarch Phoenix Stream let her white hair flutter, and her whole face glowed, thanks to your divine water of divine stars, otherwise I'm afraid I would have died. That's nothing. The female old ancestor's eyes were clear and distant, with a little admiration. All of us should thank Su Jojo. If she hadn't established NI sect, the GU substitution bug would have been the burial place of all of us. No medicine can cure it. Patriarch Phoenix Stream froze for a moment, and then nodded sincerely. She just took a gamble in a desperate situation, but now she was glad that she had the courage to take a gamble. Luck is changeable, but as more sects join NI sect, its luck will definitely rise. Patriarch Chen Su smiled. That is to say, as long as enough sects join NI sect and are strong enough, all the sects may get rid of the GU substitution bug. All the sects can get rid of the substitute GU, we can even form an army and fight against the Fate Palace. Ha 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 ha. Everyone laughed, and Patriarch Phoenix Stream's eyes narrowed into slits, which were frighteningly bright. This is something that we didn't even dare to think about in the past. Xiong Hua nodded with a smile. Su Jojo is extremely determined to fight against the Fate Ancestor. Maybe after all of us get rid of the GU substitution bug, we can go to see her. Yes, yes, yes. Of course we have to see our leader. However, we have to think about how to prevent the Life Palace from finding out in advance. It doesn't matter. Except for Patriarch Phoenix Stream, no one has been affected by the GU substitution bug for a long time. There are so many of us, and we can come up with a solution. Ha 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 ha, if I don't kill the Fate Ancestor, I am not a human being. I am not a human being. At this moment, in the Tianqing Valley, Bai Xiu suddenly opened his eyes, looked up at the sky, and pinched his fingers to calculate. The celestial phenomenon has changed, but it is not obvious. The fate is still on Su Jojo's side. Bai Xiu got up and turned into the inner hall, and a unique fragrance of the star divine water rushed into his nose. If what Su Jojo said is true, this little star divine water seems to be not enough. We have to refine more. Bai Xiu muttered to himself, and then remembered the embarrassment of being controlled by Su Jojo in the cottage, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. There has been no abnormal phenomenon in the past 100 years. How could Su Jojo appear? No abnormal phenomenon in 100 years. Didn't that mean that Su Jojo's soul was not a new soul? Bai Xiu suddenly thought of something, and his pupils instantly shrank to the size of a pinhole, and his heart beat violently. Doesn't that mean, Su Jojo is likely to be... Ding! Suddenly, an extremely ear-piercing alarm interrupted Bai Xiu's train of thought. Bai Xiu's face suddenly changed when he heard this sound. He could no longer care about other thoughts, and scrambled to the innermost adatum. There was nothing in the adatum except a white compass. But now this white compass had turned into a pure color, like the eye of a devil. Oh no! Bai Xiu was horrified. Without saying a word, he took out an ancient carrier rune and crushed it. He shouted with all his strength, "Tell Su Jojo to run away." At the same time, Blood Cherry took out the broken carrier rune in confusion, and her eyes slightly sank. This was the dead guy's most precious thing. Now it was broken, but no news came out. What was the reason? It seems that I am not late. But at this moment, a laugh sounded from the nothingness. Hearing this unique tone imprinted in her soul, the bloody light in Blood Cherry's eyes surged, and her face was completely gloomy. Chapter 632. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. White Demon. A bloody shadow flashed over Tsiyun House. Blood Cherry stared at the man in white who appeared out of thin air not far away. His face was still as blurred as in her memory. "It's really you, White Demon." Blood Cherry sneered like a knife. She clenched her fists, and a blood-colored mark flashed out between her eyebrows. In the blink of an eye, Qingshui Nun's black hair was dyed red. "I can smell your disgusting odor from far away." Bai Ming gently flicked his sleeves and said with a gentle smile, "It turns out to be my sister-in-law. How is my dear brother recently?" "White Demon, don't think that I dare not kill you because you have my body. I will get back the debt of Blood God sect sooner or later." White Demon squinted his eyes and chuckled, "Then I will wait and see." Blood Cherry seemed to hit cotton. She was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood. She snorted and looked around. "Where are your minions? You are so timid that you can't travel alone. Let them all come out and I will kill them all." "Hey," White Demon shook his head and smiled, "Sister-in-law is still so reckless. In fact, you know in your heart that it is not me who killed the people of Blood God sect, but you, right?" "Shut up." Blood Cherry scolded harshly. She raised the tobacco pipe with one hand and fiercely smashed it. The tobacco pipe instantly turned into a blood knife, which turned into a sky full of knife shadows and rushed to White Demon. Just when it was a few meters away from White Demon, it was blocked by a transparent barrier, and the knife shadows were smashed. Blood Cherry's pupils suddenly shrank, and she retreated into the mountain protection matrix without saying a word. "Don't you want to see who I brought here?" Bai Ming spread his hands and smiled wildly, then, "As you wish." Crack. As soon as he finished speaking, a crack appeared on the transparent barrier. Then, more and more cracks spread along the crack and covered the barrier like a spider web. It was as if a mirror that reflected the sky had suddenly shattered and revealed the truth. The master of Shengtian Shrine was the first to appear. A faint smile came from his black hood. Ziyun House, you dare to openly collude with Ni sect. Shengtian Shrine must enforce justice on behalf of heaven. Today, you will be destroyed. Ankuei Valley will naturally advance and retreat with the Life Palace. As soon as the voice fell, a green-robed old man with a blue face and a tall and thin body like a praying mantis appeared like a phantom. The green ghost fire in his eyes burned quietly. Huangxing Hall doesn't want to meddle in the affairs of the sect. The elegant and noble woman landed beside the Fate Palace. She looked at Blood Cherry coldly as if looking at a sinner, but Ziyun House has gone too far this time. You even tried to break the peace of Qingshui Circle for tens of thousands of years. I have to intervene. Ha 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 ha. Blood Cherry laughed crazily, her blood-red hair moving even though there was no wind. Yin Lin, you little slut, you still want to maintain your chastity after becoming a whore. I used to admire you for managing Huangxing Hall in good order at such a young age. It turns out that you are just a ball of straw. Blood Cherry, you don't have to slander me. Yin Lin looked indifferent, we just have different standpoints. In your eyes, Fate Ancestor is the culprit who brought disaster to Qingshui Circle, but in our eyes, he is the savior who pacified Qingshui Circle. Without him, the future of Qingshui Circle would be gloomy bullshit. Blood Cherry gritted her teeth. Bai Mo's selfish desire led to the destruction of Qingshui Circle and the fault of cultivation civilization. Do you think you can deceive yourself by saying this? Yin Lin looked at Blood Cherry disappointedly and sighed, for the future of Qingshui Circle, that sacrifice is nothing. Blood Cherry, your vision is too narrow, which leads to today's destruction. Summer insects can't talk about ice. Forget it. Yin Lin shook his head and sighed. Then behind him, grand elders of holy sects appeared one after another. There were hundreds of them. 3 of the 4 peak holy sects actually came. This battle was obviously more than when they went to destroy Ni sect at that time. Blood Cherry's face was pale, but she still sneered calmly. Fate Palace really thinks highly of Ziyun House. Even a lion fights a rabbit with all its strength. Bai Mo waved his hand, and all the grand elders of holy sects immediately surrounded Ziyun House and stared at Blood Cherry coldly. You know, I have always been extremely cautious. This is a good habit. Sister-in-law, how long do you think the big tactical matrix of destroying the house can last if I let everyone fight together? Blood Cherry's pupils suddenly shrank. She wanted to stall for time, but how could Bai Mo give her a chance? He waved his hand with a chuckle, and hundreds of pressures of Junior Emperor instantly broke through the sky. The sky suddenly turned dark, and even the light avoided it. It was like the end of the world. Puff. In the cave, Yue suddenly spat out a pool of blood, and the ceremony of transferring the mark of owner recognition was suddenly interrupted. Su Li was also a little affected. Her face was slightly pale, but it became ruddy in an instant. She saw Yue's face was full of horror. It's the 1,000-faced demon girl. She is nearby. She interfered with me, and the ceremony failed. Su Li suddenly got up and spread her divine awareness out of the cave. Her eyes immediately changed. When she was about to go out, Yue, who had blood on her mouth, held her legs tightly. No. You are our only hope. You, leave here. Yue trembled and took out a thumb-sized triangular rune from the universe ring. She forced it into Su Li's hands and said quickly, "This is the most precious treasure I have preserved since ancient times. Even my master doesn't know about it, the inter-realm transmission rune. I don't know if it is still useful. But now the only choice is that you try to use it and leave temporarily. When you are strong in the future, you will come back for revenge." Su Li pinched the triangular rune and slightly squinted her eyes. She softly comforted Yue, who was trembling like a frightened rabbit. Relax. Maybe things are not as bad as you think. Hurry up. Leave through the transmission matrix. Chuhi received the message and immediately arranged for everyone to evacuate temporarily. When passing by the guest room, She stopped and hesitated for a moment. Then she pushed the door open and said, "Young hero, our Tsiyun house is facing an unprecedented." Before she finished her words, Chuhi was so shocked by the face of the person in the room that she completely forgot to continue. "You, evil, I know." Ling Li, who had restored his original appearance, stood up and walked to Chuhi. He looked at the sky and said, "Hurry up. I will delay time with Qingshui Nun." Chuhi was shocked and full of doubts. Was he really the evil emperor? "Hurry up," Ling Li urged. He stamped his feet on the ground and his figure suddenly rose. "Wait." Hearing this voice, all the grand elders of holy sects saw the person clearly. They all paused and immediately looked at the Lord of Shengtian Shrine with doubts. "Ling Li, you are really here." The tone of the Lord of Shengtian Shrine fluctuated and he said sharply, "I will give you another chance. Go back with me. You are still the evil emperor of Shengtian Shrine. Go back." Ling Li was so angry that he laughed. "Go back and continue to be used by you as a tool in your hand to suppress my Qingshui palace?" The Lord of Shengtian Shrine suddenly trembled. "You, actually no, Lord of Shengtian Shrine, I have said it before." Bai Mo crossed his arms in front of his chest and gloated, "Ling Li is born to be rebellious. He will betray sooner or later. Do you regret stopping me from killing him in the cradle back then?" The Lord of Shengtian Shrine stared at Ling Li and gnashed his teeth. "No. More. Later. Regret. Ling Li? Evil Emperor?" Blood Cherry looked at Ling Li with burning eyes. The malice in her eyes faded and was replaced with a little joy. "You are the son of the palace lord?" "Young lord. I was one of the 4 generals under the command of the palace lord, Blood Cherry." Ling Li was about to say something, but Bai Mo waved his hand impatiently and said in a cold tone, "I don't have time to watch you recognize your relatives. Since you have a connection, it is better for you to have a companion on the way to hell. You want to break into my Tsiyun house?" Blood Cherry's hair suddenly turned from red to black, her eyes turned cold, and her blood-red dress turned into a Taoist robe. "Qingshui Nun," Ling Li called. Qingshui glanced at him and immediately said, "Tsiyun house has been standing for 30,000 years. If today is the end of the world, I will be the successor of the 6th generation of Tsiyun house. As the 6th generation successor of benevolent Cloud House, I have let down my ancestors, but I definitely won't let you have it easy." Speaking of this, Qingshui's indifferent eyes burst out a gloomy evil spirit that was more horrible than Blood Cherry's. Tsiyun's strange tactical matrix, open. A huge ghost shadow suddenly shrouded the whole Tsiyun house. The quiet and peaceful Tsiyun house immediately became a ghost domain that was several times more gloomy than the Sharaba. Fate Ancestor smiled slightly, the strange tactical matrix of all spirits' age. "Qingshui Nun, you can really hide. But the time has come. You will die today. Why do you struggle needlessly?" Qingshui Nun was indifferent and silent. As she thought, the ghost shadow turned into thousands of shadows and swallowed all the people of Fate Ancestor into her abdomen in an instant. Puff! Qingshui spat out a big mouthful of blood, which dyed her Taoist robe red, but she still looked indifferent. She said to Ling Li, who was standing on one side and quite at a loss, "Today, since this is my destiny, I will not choose to escape. Go to find Su Jojo and take this opportunity to leave quickly." "None." Before Ling Li finished speaking, Qingshui covered her mouth and coughed violently again. Blood dripped from her fingers, and her sigh sounded. "Don't let me down. Go." Ling Li's eyes were slightly wet. After a moment of silence, he solemnly said, "I once misunderstood you. It's my fault. None. Take care of yourself." Speaking of this, Ling Li decisively turned and rushed into the cave, only to see that Su Li had just integrated the perfect reincarnation wheel into her body. She got up and walked to Ling Li. She took a deep look at him, and then took off the reincarnation mirror from her waist and threw it to Ling Li. She said calmly, "You can go." Ling Li was slightly stunned and said bitterly, "Qingshui Nun chose to sacrifice herself for time. Let's leave together. I let you go." Su Li turned around, stepped over Ling Li's side, and walked to the front of the cave. Looking at Qingshui Nun, who trembled from time to time in the nothingness, she suddenly smiled, "I promised Xian Yu and Bai Xiu. I can't go back on my word. Su Jojo." Ling Li couldn't help but be angry when he saw that smile. Don't be impulsive. What's the difference between you going up like this and dying? He stepped forward and was about to pull her sleeve, but found that countless black symbols suddenly gushed out of her sleeve. In the blink of an eye, he was completely sealed and couldn't move. You are so long-winded. Su Li turned her head and brushed the hair behind her ear. She smiled sweetly. I am not impulsive. Chapter 633. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. Outside the cave, Chuhi walked in and saluted respectfully. She hesitated. Grand Elder Su, can you really save the Grandmaster? Su Li pursed her lips slightly, and the black light in her eyes began to flicker. Take Yue and Ling Li away. It will not be good if you are hurt accidentally. Hearing this, Chuhi somehow felt at ease. She nodded, picked up the two who were sealed with both hands, and quickly disappeared from the cave. Ling Li stared at Su Jojo, who was getting farther and farther away. His eyes were full of grievance and anger. Su Jojo, you'd better die. Otherwise, I won't let you go in my life. He hated people like Su Jojo the most. She wanted to bear everything by herself and didn't want to implicate others. But he hated himself more. Weakness is the original sin. A faint voice suddenly came to Qingshui Nun's ears. She suddenly turned around and saw Su Jojo, who should have left, appeared beside her, with her black skirt fluttering in the wind. You didn't leave. Qingshui Nun frowned. You should understand that you are shouldering a heavy responsibility. You can't be reckless. I never felt that I had any heavy responsibility. Su Li smiled brightly. I deal with Fate Ancestor because I hate him to the core. I only learned the secret of the last era when I was searching for the news of Fate Ancestor. But what does it have to do with me? As long as Fate Ancestor can die, I don't care about anything else. You, Qingshui Nun's expression changed. She was about to speak, but Su Li interrupted her and whispered, you should go. Go. Qingshui Nun was a little confused. Me? Su Li smiled slightly and clenched her fist with one hand. The inhibition that was set when Qingshui Nun was not paying attention immediately tightened and bound Qingshui Nun in it. Qingshui Nun widened her eyes and wanted to speak, but found that she could do nothing but stare. Seeing that the ghost shadow began to dissipate, Su Li narrowed her eyes and whispered, Xian Yue. Swish. A sword shadow sprang out of Tsiyun House. After dissipating, Xian Yue looked embarrassed. Grand Elder Su. Su Li looked at the gradually clear figure in the ghost shadow, and her tone was still calm. Take your master's wife and go. But, Grand Elder Su, you. Before Xian Yue finished her words, Su Li turned her head expressionlessly and said, you will only cause trouble if you stay here. Xian Yue felt suffocated and her eyes turned red. She immediately picked up Qingshui Nun, bowed respectfully, and flew into the benevolent cloud house and disappeared. Su Li quietly watched her go away, and suddenly a cold voice full of laughter came from behind. You are really here, Su Jojo. Su Li slowly turned around and saw Fate Ancestor standing not far from the mountain-protecting tactical matrix. She suddenly smiled like a flower. My Lord Fate Ancestor, I've heard a lot about you. She glanced at the supreme elders of the Glory sect who appeared one after another, and her eyes darkened. Your target is not Merciful Cloud House, but me, right? I'm just trying my luck. Bai Ming had a smile in his eyes. This is not Jojo region. The entrance of Chimo Circle is 100,000 miles away. Can you still summon Kai Tian? I can't. Su Li admitted frankly, her gaze sweeping across the many sacred sect's supreme elders. But you want to keep me here with just these substitute GU puppets? You are naive. Naive. Bai Ming smiled, and his face suddenly turned cold. Let's see who is more naive. Boom. Hundreds of streaks shot at Su Li without warning. In the blink of an eye, they penetrated the mountain-protecting tactical matrix and shot at Su Li. But Su Li seemed to have expected it, and her figure suddenly disappeared. Want to hide? The Lord of Huangxing Hall flipped her hand, and a palm-sized glazed compass flashed out. As it rotated rapidly, a beam of glazed light illuminated the nothingness. Su Li's figure, which was hidden in the dark, had nowhere to hide. Boom, 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 boom. Hundreds of junior emperors attacked at the same time, and the streaks covered the sky. In the blink of an eye, the entire mountain where the benevolent cloud house was located was blasted into ruins. Su Li frowned slightly, and her figure flashed several times in succession, shuttling through the gaps. But the beam of glazed light seemed to lock her, so that she could no longer hide. At first, it was just a simple power stripe, and Su Li could dodge it. But later, the Grand Elders of holy sects used various means to attack, which made Su Li unable to dodge. It didn't take long for her to be slightly injured. Ho ho, since the Lord of Huangxing Hall has taken action, I can't just watch. The Lord of Ankue Valley spat, and the whole area was suddenly shrouded in green smoke. The strong toxicity corroded the nothingness, and even the streaks of other holy sects' attacks were eroded. I have fed the poison with the most poisonous poison in the world for thousands of years. How much can you resist? Su Li's face suddenly changed, and she covered her mouth and nose with a muffled groan. But it seemed that she had eaten something. She opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of bright red blood, which turned into blood beads floating around. Ha 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 ha, Lord of Huangxing Hall, it seems that I am better. The Lord of Ankue Valley was arrogant, but the expression of the Lord of Huangxing Hall remained unchanged, but the compass in his hand suddenly stopped. The glazed light broke from the center and turned into a light prison to fix Su Li in place. Su Li's face changed dramatically. She punched the light prison, but she was sent flying by the countershock. Under the influence of her injury, she spat out another mouthful of blood. More and more blood beads floated in the nothingness. The smile of the Lord of Ankue Valley stopped abruptly. The Lord of Huangxing Hall glanced at him and said softly, "Everyone, you can start." All the Grand Elders of holy sects immediately began to accumulate power, trying to condense the strongest blow in their lives. The light in the nothingness was getting stronger and stronger, illuminating the world that even the sun avoided as if it was daytime. The Lord of Shengtian Shrine let out a relaxed smile. "Without Qitian's support, Su Jojo, you are just a useless weakling. Goodbye." As soon as these words came out, all the Grand Elders of holy sects were shocked, and threw out the spells in their hands at the same time. At this moment, Su Li suddenly raised her head, stared at Fate Ancestor high above in the sky, and showed a smile. Fate Ancestor's face suddenly changed, and he shouted in an unprecedented urgent voice, "Stop." But even he himself knew that it was too late for him to say that. Boom. The unprecedented explosion blasted cracks in the nothingness, constantly twisting like long snakes. The blood beads were like red gems. Under such a bombardment, they still did not evaporate, but were shot away in an instant. Under the terrifying momentum, they turned into blood arrows and shot at many Grand Elders of holy sects. They exploded with a bang, and no one was spared. But the power of these blood arrows was not much. They just made many weak Grand Elders take a few steps back, and then they could no longer do anything. The Lord of Shengtian Shrine also accidentally stained the corner of his clothes. After he couldn't get rid of it, he tore off the bloody corner of his clothes in disgust and wondered, "My Lord Fate Ancestor, why did you stop? Su Jojo should be dead, right?" Fate Ancestor stared at the empty nothingness, and his expression was unprecedentedly gloomy, without saying a word. He had a strong intuition that Su Jojo deliberately showed weakness just now and used him. But he didn't know what exactly she used him for. This kind of feeling was the worst. "I also think that Fate Ancestor, you are worrying too much." Hundreds of the power of Junior Emperor even blasted the nothingness. Su Jojo must be dead without leaving any residue. As soon as the Lord of Ankue Valley finished speaking, a woman's chuckle sounded in the nothingness. "Ho ho, Lord of Ankue Valley, you really think too highly of me." The black skirt swayed, and the woman appeared out of thin air not far from Fate Ancestor. Her black eyes were as deep and dark as the starry sky. "Not only did I die without leaving any residue, but I have become a ferocious ghost and come to claim your life." When the Lord of Ankue Valley saw the woman's face, his anger of being ridiculed suddenly disappeared. He couldn't help but step back in horror. You are, holy girl, Su Li? You are not dead." The lord of Shengtian Shrine was full of disbelief. How is it possible? You. He looked at the black clothes on Su Li. You are Su Jiuzhou. I didn't expect that after 1,000 years, the giants of holy sects still recognize me. I'm really flattered. Especially my lord Fate Ancestor. The black light flashed in Su Li's eyes. You are my idol. You can make clouds and rain with a flip of your hand. I dream to have such power. So, after waking up, I can't wait to learn from you and establish Ni sect. Do you like it? Fate Ancestor stared at Su Li. For the first time, he experienced the feeling of being schemed by others. He was still calm, but his voice was rarely low. You are very good. You are the first person to let me taste my anger. Oh. Su Li smiled like a flower, and her smile suddenly enlarged when she covered her mouth. That's really my honor. In order to thank you for your great kindness, I have prepared a lot of gifts today. I hope my lord Fate Ancestor can like them. Fate Ancestor stretched out a hand and clenched the nothingness without saying a word. The space where Su Li was located was instantly annihilated. The twisted and destroyed pneuma made the lord of Shengtian Shrine and others retreat in horror. But Su Li's black shadow disappeared without warning, and appeared among the grand elders of holy sects in the blink of an eye. My lord Fate Ancestor is impatient. Then. I can't let you wait for a long time. Now. I will give you a big gift. Su Li laughed crazily, and the corners of her mouth reached her ears. Then she took a deep breath and suddenly spat out a blood ball that was comparable to a hill. After flying upward for a short while, the blood ball suddenly exploded. The red blood rain turned into countless fine needles, stabbing into everyone's body. Many grand elders used their means to resist, but the number of blood needles was too large, and the corrosiveness was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, the protective means were pierced, and hundreds of grand elders of holy sects were stained with blood. The lord of Shengtian Shrine also couldn't resist it. His face changed, and he retreated to Fate Ancestor to avoid being hurt by the blood needles. The lord of Huangxing Hall was not as unbearable as the lord of Shengtian Shrine. He stood there expressionlessly, looking at the grand elders of holy sects who were stained with blood, and his eyes flickered. The lord of Ankue Valley was accidentally stabbed. He touched the blood mark on his neck, stretched out his hand and spread it out. Looking at the bright blood flowing in his hand, he couldn't help but wonder, this is not poisonous. Why did Su Li make such a big fuss? When Fate Ancestor heard this, his calm face changed instantly. He grabbed the hand of the lord of Ankue Valley, and there was a trace of caution and puzzlement in his eyes. Su Li was created by him, but he couldn't understand the evilness she showed now. How ridiculous. Want to know the reason? Su Li laughed in a low voice like a nightmare. A black phantom appeared out of thin air and almost stood in front of Fate Ancestor. The suppressed volcano in her eyes suddenly erupted. Let's talk on the road to hell. Chapter 634. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Find the latest chapter. The mortal city was bustling with activity. The children, who were only 5 or 6 years old, were happily chasing and playing in the streets. Suddenly, with a boom, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. Earthquake. The whole market was in a mess. Stalls were scattered everywhere. He crawled out from under the stall and spat out a mouthful of dirt. When he raised his head, he stared blankly at the huge mushroom cloud rising in the distance. What's that? The earthquake was not only in this mortal town, but also in the entire Tsiyun territory. Even several big regions near the Tsiyun territory were faintly affected, and cracks appeared on the ground. That's... A cultivator looked up at the sky and was shocked. Tsiyun House. What happened to Tsiyun House? The branch of Chanyik Attic in the Tsiyun territory worked quickly. In just one day, according to Bai Xiu's order, the news of Tsiyun House was spread to every corner of Qingshui Circle. The Life Palace was exterminated. 3 of the top 4 holy sects came out. In the end, there was a big explosion. The gate of Tsiyun House was razed to the ground. No one survived. Life Palace. Tsiyun House. Extermination. These 3 words immediately set off a huge wave in Qingshui Circle and became the topic of people's after-dinner conversation. Even in the mortal cities without information, the bad deeds of the Life Palace began to spread gradually. Such a storm was even worse than the victory of the Heavenly Sun against the Ni sect. However, no one from the Life Palace, which was at the heart of the struggle, stood out to refute. It was as if a closed sect had sunk into silence. The cultivators couldn't find the Life Palace, but the Huangxing Hall, which started from the Chamber of Commerce, suffered a disaster. Overnight, almost all the branches of the Huangxing Chamber of Commerce in all the big regions were destroyed by the angry cultivators. Ziyun House is a quiet place for Taoist practice. The seniors of Ziyun House are kind like water and never fight with others. How could such a sect be exterminated for no reason? The Life Palace, the top holy sects are all bad guys. Wrong. Don't blame the Tianhe holy sect. Without the support of the Tianhe holy sect, the Life Palace would have dominated Qingshui Circle. When the whole Qingshui Circle was in an uproar, the small world of Tianqing Valley suddenly became lively. It was all because of the arrival of the main character of this event, the benevolent Cloud House. More than 90% of the Heavenly Star Valley's disciples were male. As for the merciful Cloud House, it was 100% female. How could it not be lively? At this moment, in the forbidden bamboo house of the Heavenly Star Valley, Nun Qingshui's face was pale, but her hair was blood red. She sat cross-legged on the soft couch, and Xian Yue stood beside her, massaging her shoulders. Hi, Qingshui really doesn't take care of his body. He's lost 90% of his essence blood. Fortunately, I'm from the Blood God sect, otherwise I would be lying on the ground. Under the soft bed, Bai Xiu looked at her with a bitter smile, full of guilt. I didn't warn you in time, causing a disaster. Sigh, Lady Blood God, how is my master? Quan asked cautiously with tears in her eyes. Blood Cherry rolled her eyes, took a puff of the cigarette, and spat out a white smoke ring. How can she be? She will probably wake up after sleeping for thousands of years. Don't worry, she won't die. But if I remember correctly, you are the first disciple of Qingshui, Chen Huan, right? You are in the early stage of nature's test for thousands of years, and now you are still. I don't think you can see her. Quan Er's eyes darkened, and she whispered sadly, yes. Blood Cherry couldn't bear to see such an expression. She couldn't help but turn her eyes uncomfortably, and changed the topic. Where is the young lord? Ling Li went out with a mirror. Bai Xiu's expression was a little complicated. He got the whereabouts of Su Li, but lost the Avildor Su Jojo. Was it a loss or a gain? I believe in Grand Elder Su. There seemed to be light in Xian Yue's eyes. If she died, the whole Ni sect would be buried with her. She came forward bravely at that time, which means she was well prepared. At least, she was sure to escape. But what about the mushroom cloud? Chen Huan's question was like a basin of cold water poured on Xian Yue's head. Probably only an unprecedented fierce battle can erupt that kind of power, right? Bai Xiu sighed and shook his head. Since the big explosion, the sky is chaotic, and it is difficult to see clearly. The bamboo building fell into silence. In the Tianqing Valley, there was a spiritual waterfall falling 3,000 feet, which was very spectacular. Ling Li sat on the rock at the top of the waterfall, stroking the reincarnation mirror in his hand. This was the first time he had such a close contact with the reincarnation mirror, but he could be sure that it was the real thing at first glance. After staying there for nearly 100 years, how could he forget the breath of reincarnation? It had been several days since he came to the Tianqing Valley through the transmission matrix from Ziyun House. He had got the reincarnation mirror, but he hadn't tried to open it until now. In his heart, there was something called guilt that was haunting him. Su Jojo gave him the reincarnation mirror according to the agreement, but he didn't know whether she was alive or not. How could he open the reincarnation mirror? Shit. I'm suffocated. Suddenly, there was a roar from the reincarnation mirror, which shocked Ling Li and made him throw the reincarnation mirror out of the top of the waterfall. But before he recalled it, he saw the reincarnation mirror suddenly burst into a dazzling light, and then it floated in front of Ling Li. Ling Li was shocked and blurted out, "Are you the spirit of the reincarnation mirror?" Shit. It turns out to be you, silly boy. The reincarnation mirror swore again, and then a black lotus ring appeared on the mirror with a flash. With a ding, it left the mirror and fell on the grass. Ling Li immediately remembered that this was the ring worn by Su Jojo. How could it be here? This ring turned out to be a treasure, and it was full of spirituality. How could it scold him? Shit, you dare to put me in the mouth of an idiot. I won't forgive you. Black Lotus was sad and angry, and he scolded loudly. The reincarnation mirror lit up at the right time, and it said sarcastically, "You only dare to scold me now." Black Lotus was speechless. The head of a little beast appeared on the reincarnation mirror, and its eyes fell on Ling Li. It was expressionless and even a little honest. "Are you looking for me?" Ling Li was nervous and nodded. "Mirror spirit, do you know where Su Li reincarnated? It turns out that you want to know this." The little beast suddenly smiled with a hint of mockery, and immediately spat out a small half of the mirror that had not melted yet. "You can see it yourself." The reincarnation mirror was swallowed as expected. Ling Li saw it and immediately picked it up. After a while, the picture in the reincarnation mirror appeared again. Although the mirror was incomplete, it was enough to show the face of the reincarnated person. Swish, clang. The reincarnation mirror fell from his trembling hands, and Ling Li's face was completely stiff, leaving only a pair of eyes staring at the familiar face revealed by the half of the reincarnation mirror. She still looked the same as in the previous life, except that there was a black lotus at the corner of her eyes. The black lotus ring on her finger, the reincarnation mirror on her waist, and the familiar black skirt. The reincarnation of Su Li was clear. The voice that she called him Lord Evil Emperor seemed to still ring in his ears. No wonder he would instinctively worry about her in the holy sect of Wind Thunder. He had never been tempted by other women, and he even thought that he was not loyal to him anymore. He once felt ashamed and blamed himself. At this moment, all the memories about Su Jojo came to his mind. In the ghost region, she turned into a descendant of the ghost clan and made a scene. Her hateful eyes suddenly became extremely clear. "Do you want me to die so much? You would rather give up your life?" Even if she was full of hatred, she just hurt him and let him go. At the end of her divine awareness, he had not awakened his bloodline, but he helped the wicked and killed his clansmen. He was obviously heinous. The first elder of the Qingshui Palace did not recognize him and tried to let her kill him. But she did not do it after all. She even helped him awaken his bloodline and get rid of the control of the Shengtian shrine. After that, he followed her footsteps for the reincarnation mirror. She scolded him, drove him away, and even beat him violently. Later, he was unwilling to stay with her and pretended to be her attendant. All kinds of humiliation and resentment became attachment and regret at this time. Why didn't he find out earlier? He clearly felt a trace of familiarity when he saw the black skirt, but why didn't he think of it? Why did he suddenly find out that the person he had been looking for was around him after she was in danger again? Black Lotus looked at Ling Li's changing face and couldn't help but chuckle. "Look at him. Doesn't he look like a lost dog?" Samsara Beast shook its head. "If you talk nonsense again, be careful that the master will pull out your tongue when she comes back. I'm not sure if she really can't sense you." Black Lotus's smile froze, and then he chuckled. "We don't say that Erlang is a trap. You just want to see him lose his soul, don't you? But the master has never revealed her identity. Obviously, she doesn't want him to know. You have a good time this time. When the master comes back." Samsara Beast's face darkened, and then he said cautiously, "Then we won't tell anyone? Just say that the Fate Palace leaked it. You are worth teaching." Black Lotus smiled treacherously. "When the master comes back, I'll sue you to death." Samsara Beast shrank back into the mirror with the reincarnation mirror. His honest face suddenly became serious, and he said gloomily, "You are laughing happily now. When the master comes back, my main supernatural power should be restored. At that time, my merits and demerits will offset, and you can be unlucky. Hum. Come on, boy. Don't be like a face-changing ghost. This stupid donkey can still speak, which proves that the master must still be alive now, but we don't know where she is. Ling Li suddenly stopped and immediately stared at the reincarnation mirror. He stared so hard that the reincarnation mirror was scared. He hurriedly showed up and said, I am now the only blood sacrifice magic treasure of the master. If the master dies, I will be completely destroyed. So, the master must be fine. That girl is very tough. She can reincarnate even if her soul is destroyed. You are so nervous about this little battle. Black Lotus made sarcastic remarks, completely forgetting that he was so nervous in the reincarnation mirror that the ring was deformed. Chapter 635. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. After a long time, Ling Li took a deep breath and recovered his usual calmness. But the light in his eyes was completely different from before. It was like a barren land was suddenly injected with infinite vitality and began to take root and sprout, transforming into an oasis. Can you feel where Li is now? Ling Li stared at Black Lotus with burning eyes and couldn't help but have a thought. Li had two precious treasures, which were extremely powerful. But why did one of them have a poisonous tongue and the other a black belly? Who did she learn it from? Black Lotus coughed slightly and said, I don't know. The distance should be very far, otherwise I can feel it at all. But don't worry. Master has a big business now and will not ignore the Ni sect. Speaking of this, Black Lotus's face suddenly changed. It's over. What's wrong? Ling Li's heart tightened, and then nervously observed whether the reincarnation mirror was damaged. Black Lotus's face immediately fell. I forgot to send a message to the Ni sect. In a few days, the Ni sect will be in chaos. Then let's go immediately. Ling Li grabbed the two treasures and got up to go back. Samsara didn't resist, but just rolled his eyes and complained in his heart, Master has known that you are not reliable. She must have a backup plan. Ling Li didn't stop for a moment. Just the next day, he rushed to the Mount Ni of the Jiuzhou region and took out a new carrier rune to send a message to Ling Mo. Soon, Ling Mo met with Ling Li with a dignified face. Child, I heard that you and Su Jiuzhou were in the Tsiyun house at that time. Ling Li frowned. Who told you that? All the people in the Tsiyun house were in the Tianxing Valley and didn't come out. It was impossible for the people of the Fate Palace to leak the news. Who spread the news? It's the rumor from the holy sects that the Fate Palace belongs to. Ling Mo glanced around coldly. Let's enter the Ni sect first. Ling Li hesitated for a moment and finally nodded, okay. Hearing that Ling Li appeared, all the people in the hall of the Ni sect quickly arrived. The one sitting in the first place was naturally the current lord, Hua Yang. The atmosphere was so solemn that one could hear a pin drop. With the sound of footsteps coming from outside the hall, everyone's eyes changed, and they all looked out of the hall at the same time. Only Su Buwang snorted coldly and turned his head away. It seemed that the title of evil emperor was gone. Ling Li was no longer in black armor. Instead, he wore a black casual practitioner's robe, which looked very simple. His gaze swept across the people in the hall. Almost 90% of them were familiar faces. Ling Mo, Ling Qinglan, Su Qingtan, Su Qinghao, Yang Zai, Dongfang Wuxue, Yun Yi. Fang Yuan. His eyes paused on Fang Yuan's face for a moment, and they seemed to meet for a moment. Then he saw Su Buwang standing beside Fang Yuan and looking at him coldly. He couldn't help but have mixed feelings in his heart. He said in a low voice, everyone, how are you? I'm sick. Su Buwang was the first to shout out, and his eyes were full of anger. Did you hurt the fairy sister? Ling Li was stunned. Wang was in the Ni sect, but he didn't know Li's identity. Ling Mo couldn't help but frown and scolded, don't forget. He's your father, don't be rude. He's not. The dignified evil emperor is out of my league. Su Buwang sneered sarcastically, stared at Ling Li fiercely, turned around and ran out. Ling Li sighed and put Black Lotus ring and reincarnation mirror on the table. I'm here to return them to their original owners. Su Jiuzhou is missing, but reincarnation mirror is her blood sacrifice treasure, which can prove that she is still alive. Hua Yang's face changed slightly. She took the two treasures into her hands, and her eyes flashed with distress. She looked up and said, "Evil Emperor, please, call me Ling Li. I have already left Shengtian Shrine, and now I'm just a casual practitioner." Hua Yang was stunned for a moment, and a smile appeared on her face. Then, "Fellow practitioner Ling, please tell me in detail about the situation of Grand Elder of Ni sect in Tsiyun House." Ling Li nodded and began to talk from the beginning, but omitted the details about reincarnation mirror. Fang Yuan stood aside, and his face was a little pale. "Ling Li actually left Shengtian Shrine? For Li? Why?" Originally, he could feel a little comfort when Su Buwang was around him, but now he found that even his only advantage was in danger of losing. Tianhe sect never betrayed him, and even allowed him to fool around outside. He couldn't give up the 1,000-year affection of raising and brotherhood. Ling Li didn't know much until he left from the transmission tactical matrix. He stopped at the right time and saw the obvious rejection in everyone's eyes. He couldn't help but feel bitter. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "It seems that I shouldn't stay here. I'll leave now." Then, he turned around and left. Hua Yang's eyes flashed when she saw this, but she said, "Fellow practitioner Ling, please wait." "Lord." Yang Zai looked at Hua Yang inexplicably. Both he and Hua Yang clearly knew Su Li's identity. Why did they let Su Li's most hated person stay? Hua Yang cast a comforting look, and immediately said aloud, "Everyone, the Fate Palace is dormant, and it must be brewing a conspiracy again. The Grand Elder is not in the sect, and it is a time when the sect is empty. It's always good to have one more helper. What's more, it's a helper who knows Shengtian Shrine very well. What do you think?" Ling Mo immediately nodded, "I agree." Hua Yang glanced at him helplessly and looked at others. Sect Master's words are reasonable. Yang Zai glanced at Ling Li with a complicated look, "I hope you don't let us down again." Ling Li was silent for a moment and nodded gently. Hua Yang and Yang Zai could be said to be the senior members of Ni sect. Since they had no objection, others could only agree. "I'll go to see Buwang." Fang Yuan walked out of the hall without looking back. From beginning to end, he didn't even look at Ling Li. "Since the Grand Elder is fine, we only need to maintain the stability of the sect, which is the greatest assistance to her." Hua Yang glanced at the crowd and said, "Tianyik Attic sent a secret message. After the Battle of Tsiyun House, the 50 holy sects that submitted to the Fate Palace almost fell into chaos at the same time. The news about Ling Li also came out at that time. Otherwise, Ling Li, if you come here, you will immediately be attacked by others." "I see." Ling Li responded and continued to listen. The chaos only lasted for a short period of time. Now these 50 holy sects have all announced that they are closed and don't welcome guests. The news about Tianyik Attic is also cut off. Hua Yang's white and slender knuckles tapped the table rhythmically. She was majestic. Unconsciously, she had completed the transformation from the head of a small sect. The Grand Elder should have used extraordinary means to make the Fate Palace suffer a great loss. Otherwise, according to the temper of the Fate Palace, it is not normal that the Grand Elder of Ni sect is missing but still doesn't come to revenge. Maybe he is still worried about the old ancestor of Blazing Sky. Yang Zai continued, "But he doesn't know that it is actually difficult for Blazing Sky to break through the space and show up without you destroying the seal of Chimo Circle." "You mean the seal in Dafu region?" Ling Li suddenly said, "If it is that seal, I can help to break it for a while." "You?" Yang Zai's tone was a little unhappy. "The seal is jointly sealed by many Grand Elders of holy sects. If you want to break it for a short time, you must have the combat power of Junior Emperor, and can't be too weak." "Ling Li, have you become a Junior Emperor?" "Not yet." Ling Li shook his head, then hesitated for a moment and said, "But it is not a big problem to break the seal for a short time. Although, I am still no match for Su Jiuzhou." As soon as this was said, Yang Zai was stunned. "Even if you used to be the first on the Tianjiao list, how can it be so easy to cross the chasm between nature's test and Darching Realm?" Ling Li looked calm. "As long as Blazing Sky is willing to show up, I don't have to worry about it." Hua Yang nodded skeptically. "Fellow Daoist Ling, you've really helped a lot. I can only help you this much." Ling Li knew that Hua Yang and others didn't believe him, but he was not interested in showing off. He just said, "If you need anything, just come to me." As long as others guarded the seal, Ni sect would definitely not be in danger in Jojo region. This was enough. The Fate Palace was still as dark and silent as usual. In the White Hall, Bai Ming sat quietly on the rush cushion, looking up at the golden pagoda that was rotating slowly but never showing a picture. He was calculating Su Li's position. But even if he used the flesh and blood that Su Li left in the Fate Palace in her previous life, the golden pagoda was still chaotic, and nothing could be shown. This had never happened before. "Little Su Li, are you really my nemesis?" Su Li was the product of his own creation, but now, she became his nemesis. Bai Ming thought quietly with a focused and calm expression. It seemed that he didn't have much trouble because of the turmoil caused by the 50 holy sects. Not long after, the figure of the Lord of Shengtian Shrine appeared outside the hall. Outside, he was the one with the highest status among the 3 peak holy sects. But in the Fate Palace, he was the humblest among the 3. "My Lord Fate Ancestor, things are under control." The Lord of Shengtian Shrine bowed his head and said, "Ankuei Valley Master is also affected, and the impact is still increasing. No matter what method is used, he can't be cured, just like your poisonous substitute insect. It is the same poison as the poisonous substitute insect." "I see. Keep an eye on those poisonous people and don't let them continue to go crazy and destroy." Bai Ming responded without looking back and waved his hand. The Lord of Shengtian Shrine quickly bowed his head and left. "Poison," Bai Ming's deep voice echoed in the empty White Hall. After all, he was an outsider. Even if he had stayed in this world for nearly 20,000 years, he knew nothing about the history of this world because of the fault of the cultivation civilization. Just as the people in this world were helpless against the poisonous substitute insect, he was also helpless against the blood poison used by Su Li. "Little Su Li, this time you really defeated me. Hey." The smile in Bai Ming's eyes became deeper, "but you spent so much effort just to destroy hundreds of dispensable garbage. Isn't your vision a little narrow?" "Zipei." In the hall, a beautiful figure slowly walked in and bowed respectfully to Bai Ming's back. Then she raised her head and revealed a face that was somewhat similar to Su Li's. "I'm here." Chapter 636. You can search for poisonous wife in Baidu. You can search for the latest chapter. "Come to me," Bai Ming said softly. Su Zipei obeyed and walked to his side. She stood there quietly and obediently. "How is the mother poisonous insect recently?" Su Zipei immediately replied, "Everything is as usual. The mother poisonous insect has laid a batch of new eggs and is about to mature." "Very good. After this batch matures, try your best to infiltrate Tianhe sect." Hearing Bai Ming's words, Su Zipei suddenly raised her head in surprise. "Not Ni sect? Why? Do you want revenge?" Bai Ming's eyes left the golden tower and fell on Su Zipei. Su Zipei trembled slightly and said that she didn't dare. Bai Ming smiled faintly and said nothing. He turned his eyes back, and coldness flashed in his eyes. At the moment when he saw that Su Jojo was Su Li, he knew that the role of the stand-in life poisonous insect was not big. Qingshui Circle's luck was weakened by half, and she had the bonus of Tianjiao list, so the life poisonous insect couldn't parasitize anyone in Ni sect. Most of the 50 grand elders of holy sects were disabled by Su Li. Since the new poisonous insect couldn't be used, he could only find a way from the old poisonous insect. "Go and wake up all the remaining 27 sects' grand elders in advance." Hearing this order, Su Zipei almost thought that she had heard it wrong. She couldn't help but ask, "But this will cause fatal damage to those grand elders. They can't keep the means they used when they were alive, and their strength, do it." Bai Ming's tone was a little faint. Su Zipei immediately stopped talking, saluted, and left the hall. Bai Ming stared at the golden tower and whispered to himself, "You want revenge, but the price is the extinction of all holy sects in Qingshui Circle. I don't know what the practitioners of Qingshui Circle will think of your Ni sect if they know it." Speaking of this, Bai Ming raised the corner of his mouth and showed a smile. The easiest way to defeat a person was to attack his heart. Just like Ling Qingshui, what really doomed him was not his injury, but his guilty heart. Lord, bad news. At this moment, Su Zipei came back and said in a panic, just now, the numas of the 27 Grand Elders disappeared at the same time. The smile on Bai Ming's face froze, and Su Zipei saw a ferocious look on his face for the first time. Blessings never come in pairs, and misfortunes never come singly. A moment later, in the dark cave, the walls were covered with insect eggs, and the smell of blood was nauseating. The altar where the 27 eggs were placed was a mess. Bright red blood was scattered all over the table, slowly dripping down the corner of the table. The warm air was still rising, as if this mess had just happened not long ago. Bai Ming stood in front of the sacrificial table, his face faintly discernible. Su Zipei followed behind him, her face full of fear and terror. What kind of punishment would she face for failing to keep an eye on him? He. In the silence, Bai Ming suddenly laughed softly. You know that I'm a fate ancestor, yet you still use a fate art to conceal the secrets of heaven. Are you humiliating me? However, this group of holy sect supreme elders, who he did not care about at all before, succeeded. After getting rid of the poisonous vital insect, they used various means to make him unaware. In addition, during this period of time, Su Jojo, Su Li involved a lot of energy, so they didn't find such a big mistake. How much did Su Li participate in it? Was it intentional or unintentional? Bai Ming's eyes narrowed slightly. He remembered that he didn't close his eyes in the big explosion above the Tsiyun house that day. He even clearly saw that the crazy woman stared at him and made a few mouth shapes. Are you satisfied with the interest I collected? We will meet again. Su Zipei saw Bai Ming suddenly shrugging his shoulders and immediately laughed softly. Then it turned into a loud laugh, which frightened her. It was another laughter that she had never seen before. Ha 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 ha, this is interesting. After laughing, Bai Ming suddenly turned around and stared at Su Zipei. Ling Xian was taken away by Su Jojo, and there is probably no hope for her to come back. You have been a slave here for 1,000 years, and you have never complained about the bitterness. I see your sincerity. At this time, my life palace lacks a face of the younger generation. You were also a talent in the past. Are you willing to be the young lord of my life palace? Su Zipei seemed to be electrified all over, and her face was red. She was so excited that she couldn't control herself. I swear to follow you to the death. Boom. A green thunderbolt flashed through the nothingness, which shocked a group of warriors who were exploring in the dark realm. They instantly fell to the ground and buried their heads in fear. It's too dangerous. It's getting dark. Captain, this is the depths of the dead realm. There can't be any survivors. Let's go back. The woman called Captain raised her head, and her eyes were sharp. She spat and said, then let's go back. After the rumbling subsided, the woman stood up like a carp. The others also stood up and dusted off their clothes that were covered in black debris. Just as they were about to leave, the woman turned around and inadvertently glanced at something. Suddenly, she let out a soft cry of surprise and pointed at a black stone not far away. Why does the shape of this stone look like a person? After saying that, the woman ran over to confirm without saying anything. The others suddenly laughed. Captain, are you crazy about finding a survivor? Yes, that is a stone. How can it be a person? If it is a person, I will perform to eat shit. The woman walked to the black stone, gently touched the hard surface of the stone, and then knocked on it. The stone suddenly made a dull echo. Hollow. The woman's eyes turned cold. Without saying anything, she used her strength and slammed on the stone. Crack. The last person's eyes widened, and he immediately swallowed the second half of his words. He ran over and said, Captain, let me help. The others also stopped joking and ran to help break the stone. The woman captain looked serious. After hesitating for a moment, she reached her hand into the stone cave and pulled out a corner of the black gauze. Her face immediately changed, and she ordered, quick. Clean the head of the survivor as fast as possible. After a while, the stone was finally completely removed. The people were so tired that they sat around the stone and panted. Damn, this stone is too hard. I am a level 5 warrior, but I am exhausted. The bearded man complained incessantly. Another tall and thin man waved his hand weakly. Captain, look, are there really survivors inside? I am afraid that we have opened the coffin of an ancient existence, right? The woman captain was obviously stronger, but her chest was rising and falling. She nodded and waved her hand. The thick black debris was immediately removed, revealing the true appearance of the survivor in the black stone. A girl's pale face without a trace of blood entered everyone's eyes. The black lotus mark at the corner of her eye made her already mysterious look even more strange. The woman captain was stunned. Looking at the girl's calm and beautiful face, she could not help but feel her scalp go numb, and sweat appeared on her back. Could it be that because of the earthquake, the coffin was shaken up, and they accidentally dug up an incredible grave? I did not mean to offend you, don't blame me, don't blame me. The bearded man was not very courageous. At this moment, seeing such a horrifying scene, he was so scared that he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. The woman captain could not help but laugh, and the tense atmosphere relaxed a lot. Another female warrior looked at the girl's face and could not help but sigh, so beautiful. She must be in existence with a very high status. She has been dead for so long, but there is no decay. It is also very likely that it is the effect of the dead realm. The tall and thin male warrior seemed to be very courageous. He looked at the girl's face and stretched out his hand to open her mouth. I heard that those noble existences would put precious funerary objects in their mouth. Let me see. No. The woman captain was very unhappy to stop him, but it was too late. The tall and thin male warrior stopped himself and slowly raised his head. His face was full of horror, and even with a hint of sobbing, Captain, can the dead breathe? Heh! As soon as these words came out, the bearded man seemed to explode. He scrambled to the woman's side. Sister's corpse came back to life. Look at how useless you are. The woman captain laughed angrily. She walked over and pulled the stiff tall and thin man away. She put her finger to the girl's nose and really felt the flow of breath. She is still alive. The person who was buried in the stone for who knows how long is still alive. She looked at the girl's face in a daze. Suddenly, she did something that made the whole team extremely horrified. Captain, why are you carrying her? The tall and thin man's voice was trembling as if he had seen the most terrifying scene in his life. The bearded man's legs went soft and he collapsed to the ground. Since she is alive, we can't leave her here. The woman frowned and scolded the bearded man. Li Dazhuang, are you a man? If you cry again, I will leave you here. The bearded man immediately shivered. He wiped his tears and stood beside the tall and thin man. Another female warrior saw this and shook her head. She walked to the woman's side and could not help but complain, Dazhuang, sister is still more terrifying, right? The woman immediately glared at her. She stuck out her tongue and stretched out her finger to poke the girl's sleeping face on the captain's shoulder. Looking at the girl's curly eyelashes, her heart was about to melt. So cute. The bearded man and the tall and thin man saw this scene and looked at each other at the same time. They both saw the desire to cry in each other's eyes. Women are all devils. 2 hours later, the group walked out of the black area and a simple small camp came into view. The leader is back. Someone shouted and everyone ran to the gate to welcome them. Their eyes were filled with sincere loyalty and respect. The whole small camp added up to less than 100 people. They were all survivors who were fished out of the dead area by the leader. If it was not for the leader not going to the large camp and guarding here every day, they would have died long ago. Look. The leader saved another one. It's a little girl. So beautiful, so clean. She doesn't look like she was picked up from outside. Really, let me see. Seeing that there were more and more people, the female warrior immediately took a few steps forward and shouted, disperse, disperse. You only know how to eat melons every day. Hurry up and get to work. When everyone saw her, their expressions changed slightly and they all dispersed. The female warrior smiled and turned back to look at the captain who was still carrying the girl. The captain shook his head helplessly, you all go rest. After saying that, She hesitated for a moment and carried the girl back to her own tent. Chapter 637. You can search poisonous wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. In the tent, the woman put the girl in black dress on her bed, and then turned around to boil a basin of water and put it on the bed. Looking at the snow-white face on the bed, the woman's eyes flashed with inexplicable light. Who are you? Why are you in a stone in the dead zone? The clothes you wear are not damaged at all, and I have never seen the style before. Even a fool knew that the girl in front of her was definitely not an ordinary person. Of course, the woman was not stupid. Looking at the girl's face, she was lost in thought. Then she thought of something and sighed in a low voice. She wrung the towel and was about to wipe the girl's face. Suddenly, she felt a grip on her wrist, and when she looked down, she saw a pale and withered hand with dried blood vessels grabbing her. The woman's face changed slightly. When she looked up again, she saw the girl lying on the bed was looking at her with a pair of black and pure eyes, full of vigilance and alertness. Don't be afraid. The woman did not try to break away from her hand. She comforted her. You are safe now. I saved you. You woke up soon after I came back. Su Li frowned. She couldn't understand. She wanted to open her mouth to speak, but found that after the evil ghost exploded, although the surface injury had recovered, the internal injury had not improved at all, including the throat injury. Thinking about it, Su Li was cautious and did not transmit the sound. She dipped her hand in the watermark on the bedside and wrote a line of words. Where is this? The woman looked at a row of scribbles on the bedside and was suddenly dumbfounded. Why were the words different? Was this girl really an ancient remnant? So you can't understand it either? The woman blurted out. Looking at Su Li's blank eyes, she patted her head again and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I know you can't understand it, but I still say it. Fortunately, I just broke through to the 7th level a few months ago and produced the primordial spirit, so I transmitted the sound to you. I hope you won't be scared. As she said, she pinched a gesture rather unskillfully, and the intermittent sound of thought echoed in Su Li's mind. Can you hear it? Su Li felt strange. After a moment of silence, she nodded. Great, I'm the first to use this. The woman breathed a sigh of relief and then transmitted the sound. My name is Li Qing, the leader of this camp. You can rest here and don't worry about danger. Su Li wanted to ask where this place was, but she didn't want to expose herself prematurely because of the language barrier. Li Qing looked at Su Li's exposed dry arms and felt distressed. What happened to you? Your face was pale and your blood vessels dried up, as if your blood was drained. How could you? How can you? Recalling the memory before the coma, Su Li closed her eyes and shook her head. Seeing this, Li Qing smiled and comforted him. It's okay if you don't remember. Many of the people I saved from the dead zone have lost their memories. You should rest first. When your injuries are better, someone will explain to you. At this point, Li Qing looked back at Die Zhuang, who was waiting in front of the tent, and suddenly stood up. I'm going to do something else. You rest well and don't think too much. Su Li watched Li Qing leave. When she saw Li Dazhuang immediately pulled the tent cloth and ran away as if he had seen a ghost. Su Li frowned slightly. Was it really another world? At the last moment of the evil ghost self-explosion, she directly escaped into the nothingness and used the teleportation rune given by Huan. Then the wave of self-explosion poured over. She felt black and didn't know anything. When she woke up again, she was already in this small camp. Thinking of this, Su Li reluctantly waved a warning restriction, and then began to check the injury. The evil ghost self-explosion for the second time, plus the teleportation, the scattered energy was difficult to recover, and it took a long time to regenerate. Her veins and arteries were all dried up, without a single drop of blood left. All the blood had been used on those venerable ones of the sage sect. Fortunately, that was the case. Otherwise, when Li Qing saved her, he would have already stepped into the gates of hell. Her pubic region was empty, leaving only the Black Lotus throne, which was dim. The original 4 divine thunders all disappeared, along with the perfect chakra and Su Bai. Xiao Bai, Su Li frowned. She lured all the holy sects to bombard her together in order to integrate the divine thunder of the 5 elements into one. Only under the absolute pressure of external force could the divine thunder of the 5 elements put down the grudge against each other and integrate perfectly. This was what Qingshui Nun learned from their brief communication when she gave her the perfect chakra. Originally, she only asked Su Bai to inject the power of a divine thunder, but Su Bai's whole body rushed into the perfect chakra. There was no contract relationship between her and Su Bai, so it was even more difficult to know whether he was dead or alive at the moment and where he was. Fortunately, she had refined the perfect chakra, and she could barely sense it. When her injury recovered, she might sense it more clearly. Well, I should recover some strength first. Although Li Qing is not in danger, how can I fully believe it? Thinking of this, Su Li put aside distractions, ran Sueyu tactics, and gradually settled. A few days later, Su Li's face was a little ruddy. Li Qing went out early and came back late every day. Seeing Su Li's change, she was also happy. In view of Su Li's special situation, she could only teach her words every day. Su Li finally knew that she really left Qingshui Circle and came to Qimo Circle, the territory of Blazing Heaven. With her realm, she could learn the language of a circle in a moment. So in just 2 days, she had already figured out the rules of Qimo language, and writing and speaking were no longer a problem. However, she still did not speak. Through these days' understanding, she found that the cultivation culture of Qimo Circle was completely different from that of Qingshui Circle. It was quite primitive. Although Li Qing had the cultivation of Huashan realm, in terms of application, she was even worse than the practitioners of Zhuji realm in Qingshui Circle. On this day, Li Qing was not in the camp again. Su Li put on the clothes given by Li Qing, opened the tent, and walked out for a walk. Not long after she walked out, the female warrior who guarded the camp today ran over quickly and said in surprise, "Hey? Can you get out of bed and walk?" After saying that, she reacted and couldn't help but say, "I forgot." Captain said that you even forgot the language. Can you understand some simple words now? My name is Wu Rong, and I am one of the only 2 level 6 warriors in the camp. Wu Rong. Su Li tried to speak, but she didn't deliberately restore her vocal cords, so her tone was still a little hoarse. Yes. My name is Wu Rong. Wu Rong was surprised. You are so smart. You have learned to speak in just a few days. What's your name? Do you remember? Su Li was silent. Li Qing knew some details of her, but she said she lost her memory in front of others, so it was not appropriate to say her name. It doesn't matter if you don't remember. Wu Rong took Su Li's hand and dragged her out. I'll take you around. Although there are few people in the camp and it is very peaceful, you are too small and beautiful. If I don't hold the fort, it is inevitable that some people will bully you unconsciously. Wu Rong didn't care whether Su Li could understand or not, or according to her reason, it was to exercise your hearing. She took Su Li around the camp. This did bring a lot of help to Su Li. After all, Li Qing's teaching was very one-sided. Only in the whole environment of the camp could she collect more words. Walking to the edge of the camp, Su Li saw that the protective wall outside the camp was just ordinary rock. She couldn't help but feel confused and asked aloud, "Why don't you build a better wall?" Wow, you can say a complete sentence. Wu Rong's eyes lit up. You are so talented. I can explain it to you, but I don't know if you can understand it completely. In fact, the whole camp has been moving, so there is no need to build a good wall at all. It will be abandoned soon. The captain should have told you about the dead zone, right? That's where we found you. Su Li nodded. The dead zone was also the reason why Kai Tian wanted to lead the creatures of this circle to attack Qingshui Circle. When she had just reincarnated, she had come to this world's passageway once. She had also met the cultivators of this world. At that time, she had found it very strange. Why did all the cultivators in this world think that they had to risk their lives for the sake of war? Sometimes, there was no need to throw away their lives at all. Until this moment, she understood. It turned out that every practitioner who attacked Qingshui Circle was fighting for the next generation. The dead zone, named Psi Zone, was a zone of death. In the zone, no ordinary creatures could survive. They would be eroded to death in a few seconds. The dead zone was still expanding, gradually eroding every inch of land of Qimo Circle. Whether it was Qingshui Circle or Qimo Circle, practitioners were always the minority of the minority. Most creatures were still ordinary mortals who had no resistance when the disaster came. But it happened that practitioners also reached the peak step by step from mortals. If there was no large base, there would only be one result of Qimo Circle destruction. Because the captain wants more time to search for survivors, our camp is very close to the dead zone. So, every time the dead zone is too close, we have to move away. Su Li nodded and turned to see the men who were still building the wall in full swing. Their faces were full of happiness. In the background of the disaster, it was the greatest happiness to have a place to live. Suddenly, Su Li's eyes were fixed. She walked quickly to the wall and bent down to pick up a black stone. When the men who were building the wall saw her, their eyes lit up and they were about to go up to her, but when they saw Wu Rong behind her, their expressions immediately changed. They immediately buried their heads in their work, and the bricks under their hands moved even faster. Humph! You are sensible. Otherwise, if you dare to bully our little sister, I will beat you lazy guys to shit. Wu Rong walked to Su Li angrily and asked, building the wall is the hardest work. Usually, it is the men who have made mistakes in the camp. What are you doing here? Su Li pointed to the crystal clear black stone in her hand and asked, what is this? This. Wu Rong scratched her head and turned over the stone under her feet. She also picked up a bigger black stone and said, isn't this kind of stone just an ordinary stone? You can pick it up everywhere around the camp. The closer you are to the dead zone, the more there are. The dead zone is full of them. Black debris is the easiest to dirty the clothes. Su Li was silent on the spot. Chapter 638. You can search Poisonous Wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. In the eyes of Wu Rong and the people of Qimo Circle, this might be an extremely ordinary stone. But in Su Jojo's eyes, its pneuma was exactly the same as that of the 12th grade Black Lotus she saw in the cottage in Immortal Ascension City. The difference was only the strength of the pneuma. Yi Che, the talent of Ghost Clan, guarded the 12th grade Black Lotus for 40,000 years, which showed how precious it was. But in Qimo Circle, it was everywhere. Su Li was surprised and pleasantly surprised. If what Wu Rong said was true, although these gravel couldn't make her remaining 6th grade Lotus stand manifest, with enough Black Lotus, the remaining 12th grade Black Lotus transforming sword might be nurtured in a very short time. She hoped that the legendary secret skill of prehistoric Ghost Clan would not disappoint her. Thinking of this, Su Li put down the stone in her hand and said, I want to go outside alone. Go outside? Wu Rong was shocked. There is no danger outside during the day, but you are alone. I will walk around and come back soon. Su Li smiled and turned away. Although Wu Rong was very worried, the captain was not at home and she had to take care of the camp. She could only tell her again and again, then you must walk around and don't go far. I will. Looking at Su Li's back, Wu Rong scratched her head and murmured, how long has it been? She can communicate with me without any obstacle. Has her memory recovered? The gate of the camp had been open during the day. Su Li walked out directly and suddenly felt that the pneuma in the air had changed. There was a lingering death pneuma. Is it because the dead zone is too close? Su Li guessed and looked up at the gloomy sky. It would take some time for her injury to recover, and it was still too difficult for her to fly in the air. After walking for a distance, she suddenly stopped and squatted down to rub the dust off her hands. She had only walked 300 meters away from the campsite, and the solid soil had turned into loose sand. There was no way to grow food on such soil. Naturally, mortals would not be able to survive and would face the danger of starvation. Li Qing's camp should be shrouded in a special field similar to an array formation. It's neither a restriction nor an array formation, and it's most likely unique to this world. I can't understand it, but it's probably because of the harsh living environment. While thinking, Su Li got up and continued to walk forward. Although she did not fly, her walking speed was definitely much faster than that of Li Qing. But in a moment, the sandy land around her became hard rocks as dark as ink. They had arrived at the dead zone. Su Li scanned with her divine awareness, and then her eyes focused. She flashed and appeared under a boulder. In the crack of the boulder, a palm-sized black lotus was quietly blooming, exuding a strong vitality that was incompatible with the dead zone. Born from the dead, Su Li seemed to understand something. She reached out and plucked the black lotus. It was cold in her hand. After a while, the black lotus withered and drifted away, merging with the black debris all over the sky. With self-mockery in her eyes, Su Li crushed the rhizome in her hand and sighed, "Even if you have such ability, but you are still too weak." Was she talking about Black Lotus or herself? Who could say for sure? Su Li was not a sentimental person. Even though the unique way of life of Black Lotus made her sigh with emotion, it was only for a moment. Soon, Su Li got rid of distractions and began to look for the gravel of Black Lotus. The pneuma of those that had become debris had already dispersed in the dead zone. She didn't want to expose it. It was not convenient for her to practice in the dead zone, so she could only find more black stones to take back. Fortunately, the universe ring in the Chimo circle could also be used. In the entire camp, she only saw one universe ring from Li Qing. She still remembered that the practitioner she met in the passage space told her that the universe ring was very precious in the Chimo circle, and ordinary people couldn't have it. Li Qing just broke through the 7th level not long ago, so he was not qualified to get the universe ring when he was at the 6th level. But she indirectly asked Wu Rong that Li Qing always had the ability to store things with him before that. Coupled with the special means set up in the camp, she had to think about Li Qing's identity. It was not a good thing to expose it prematurely. Before nightfall, Su Li returned to the camp, but Li Qing hadn't come back yet. Seeing Su Li was intact, Wu Rong was relieved. She ran over and said, "You must be tired and hungry after going out for so long. Dinner is almost ready. Why don't you take a rest first?" Su Li nodded and was about to leave. Suddenly, she heard a noise at the door. Hearing the sound, she turned her head and saw Wu Rong's expression suddenly changed slightly. Wu Rong rushed over and shouted, "Get out of the way." Su Li also followed. Li Qing was covered with blood and his face was pale. He was supported into the main tent by Wu Rong, who looked serious. Li Dazhuang and others also had some injuries, but they didn't look as serious as Li Qing. Black Lotus was a sacred object of Ghost Clan in Qingshui Circle. Human clan would naturally be hurt if they touched it. Li Qing had the pneuma of being eroded by Black Lotus. Anyway, Li Qing was equivalent to a warrior of Huashan realm. No matter how careless he was, it was impossible for him to be scratched by stones. Su Li's eyes flashed and followed into the tent. Li Qing had taken off all his blood-stained clothes and leaned on the bed tiredly. Seeing Su Li coming over, Wu Rong was flustered and shouted anxiously, "Come and help me. It's too slow for me to deal with it alone." Seeing Li Qing close his eyes and gasp more heavily than before, Su Li didn't hesitate and said, "What am I going to do?" Hearing this, Li Qing suddenly opened his eyes in surprise. Have you learned the language?" Su Li nodded and stared at Wu Rong's movements. Wu Rong pointed to the dense small wounds on Li Qing's body and said quickly, "We have to clean up all the wounds of the captain as soon as possible. The poison of the dead region is not a joke. If the captain takes it, his strength is likely to decline and there will be sequelae." Without saying anything, Su Li picked up the extra cloth and dipped it in water to wipe Li Qing's wounds. Every time she wiped a wound, she would secretly absorb the pneuma of Black Lotus. There were too many wounds on Li Qing's body. Under Su Li's deliberate control, it took her 2 hours to absorb the pneuma of Black Lotus from all the wounds. "Captain, how do you feel?" Wu Rong looked worried. At this moment, Li Qing's face had recovered a little ruddy. He smiled and nodded slightly. "Thanks to you too, I feel much more relaxed." "That's good." Wu Rong looked scared. "Captain, Did you encounter a corpse monster today? How big is it? Li Qing nodded with a slightly serious face and said in a stern voice, not big, only the size of a palm, but it is extremely fast. Go and prepare for it. We will move out early tomorrow morning. Okay. I'm going now. Wu Rong left the tent without saying anything, and also took away the warriors who were still waiting in front of the tent to arrange the matters. Li Qing sensed the rapid recovery of the injuries in her body. She had been poisoned by the dead region, but she had never recovered so quickly. Although Su Li did it very secretly and she couldn't sense it, the only variable here was her. Since she didn't want to expose it, Li Qing didn't mention it. She just smiled and asked, "Can you communicate normally?" Su Li nodded and said frankly, "Yes, what hurt you?" "A monster in the dead region. We call it the corpse monster. It rarely appears in the periphery of the dead region. I usually only explore around the dead region." Speaking of this, Li Qing paused and said awkwardly, "Unless I get lost. Last time I got lost and went deep into the dead region, so I happened to meet you. Fortunately, I didn't encounter the corpse monster. Otherwise, we would all be finished." Corpse monster? Are the dead people turned into monsters? No, not all of them are people. Many of them are animals, and their whole body is rotten and oozing pus, which is very terrible. Li Qing looked dignified. "I can meet it in the periphery, which means that the dead region is expanding again. When I first established the camp 30 years ago, the dead region only expanded once every 5 years. Now it has been shortened to 1 year. It is accelerating." Li Qing's eyes showed deep worry. "I know that this world is not infinite. If one day, the dead region occupies every inch of this world, where should we go?" Su Li's eyes flashed. She couldn't answer Li Qing's question. After all, she was not in Qingshui Circle. But, although the breath of the Black Lotus was poisonous, it didn't have the effect of refining the corpse. It was just a pure ghost poison. There must be secrets in the dead region. After her injury recovered, she might go to explore it. But before that, Su Li sighed when she looked inside her body, which was still terrible. Li Qing thought that she was depressed about the current situation, so he comforted her, "Leave those things to the big shots. Let's not talk about it. But you can learn a language in just 3 days. You must have a high cultivation, right?" Speaking of this, Li Qing blinked and said cautiously, as if he was afraid to stimulate Su Li, "Can you tell me your name?" Su Li was stunned. Then she dipped her finger in water and wrote 2 words in the red demon language beside the bed. After writing, she raised her head and chuckled, "My name is Su Li." Su means awakening, and Li means dripping. "Your name is really nice." Li Qing praised, then changed his mind and said, "Our camp is made up of less than 10% warriors, and most of them are low-level warriors. Your cultivation is definitely not low. Are you willing to stay in my camp and continue to search for survivors?" Su Li was silent for a moment and asked, "Haven't you thought about going to a large camp? Your personal strength is too small after all. If there is danger one day, such a camp will be wiped out with a little carelessness, and your efforts will be in vain." The smile on Li Qing's face immediately disappeared a little. She didn't know this, but she also had her difficulties. If it's inconvenient to answer, you don't have to say it. Su Li's still pale face showed some gentleness. "I'm happy to provide shelter for my savior." "I'm not a savior. I just did what I could." Li Qing waved her hand embarrassedly. "By the way, I don't know how your injury has recovered recently." Su Li sensed for a while and shook her head and sighed. "Now the injury has recovered, less than 1%. Chapter 639. You can search poisonous wife in Baidu. Search for the latest chapter. Less than 1 in 100. Li Qing looked at Su Li's serious expression and was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she burst into laughter. She touched Su Li's head and said softly, "You should take care of yourself first. The situation is not so bad that you need to show up." Although she didn't know Su Li's cultivation, she was almost equal to an ordinary person with such an injury. Unless, She was a supreme existence like the sky-burning lord and the deputy lord. But Su Li was so young. How could it be possible? Su Li knew what Li Qing was thinking, but she didn't say much. She just said, "If there is anything I can do for you, just tell me." "Got it." Li Qing waved her hand. Su Li smiled and turned away. After she could walk, Li Qing naturally changed her residence. In order to take care of her, she asked Li Dazhuang to move and gave the tent next door to Su Li. Early in the next morning, Su Li was awakened by Wu Rong. "Little Li, are you still asleep? Get up." Wu Rong came in and pulled up Su Li, who had just pretended to lie down. She said, "Today, our camp will be moved 10 miles away. You are still injured. I am tired. I will help you pack up the tent." Su Li sleepily sat up and said, "Thank you. Don't mention it. You should put on clothes that are convenient for walking. We will set off soon." Wu Rong smiled. Su Li nodded and took off the heavy soul robe. She suddenly felt relaxed. She almost forgot that this magic treasure still had a suppressive effect on her. When she was in the peak state, the heavy soul robe had already lost its original function. For her, it was only equivalent to a piece of clothing that was not easy to be torn. But now, Su Li smiled and took the heavy soul robe in her hand. She walked to the door and saw that it was still dark outside. More than 100 tents had been dismantled. Large and small packages were everywhere. Many men and women could be seen busy nervously in the fog of the night. These people probably began to pack up in the middle of the night. Except for her sensitivity to danger, she didn't care much about what happened in the camp. She didn't find it last night. It seemed that the space in Li Qing's cosmos ring was limited. Otherwise, he could have simply stored all the dead objects in the camp into the ring and taken them away. Such a long preparation time would not have been necessary. At this moment, a tall and thin warrior in his early 30s came over. He seemed to be a little embarrassed. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "Hello, my name is Dai Hechuan. Captain saved you that day, and I was also there. Your name is Su Li?" Su Li nodded and stared at Dai Hechuan with her clear eyes. "What can I do for you?" Dai Hechuan immediately blushed and stammered, "No, nothing, I just want to apologize. That day, I thought you were a character from an ancient tomb. I was too rude. Xiaochun, if you have time to talk with Sister Li outside, why don't you come in and pack your things?" The sound of Wu Rong gnashing her teeth came from the room. Dai Hechuan's expression changed slightly. He smiled apologetically and gave a fist and palm salute to Su Li. Then he immediately lifted the curtain and went in. "Sister Rong, I'm coming to help." Su Li turned around and looked at Dai Hechuan's flattering appearance. She couldn't help but feel a little funny. Dai Hechuan's cultivation was the same as Wu Rong's. Even if he was a little worse, the difference would not be too big. What made them a little afraid of Wu Rong? However, even if she was afraid, she could still see that Dai Hechuan's expression when he looked at Wu Rong was not fake at all. The circle of the whole camp was quite simple, which made her feel the long-lost simple and pure comradeship. Perhaps it was because of this that there was not much darkness in this small camp. Even in the secular world, dark and dirty things were always inevitable. But if there was a bright and kind person to guard this camp, the light of humanity would illuminate the dark corners, make the darkness retreat, and make it more beautiful. The only flaw was that Li Qing was too weak. Su Li looked back at the deep night outside the camp. She turned around and found an empty corner to enter Kang Lei's cave. As soon as she entered the cave, Hong Baizhu cried and rushed to her. "Sister, brother Su Bai is missing." At this moment, there was no disgust for Su Bai in her eyes, but concern and worry. "When are we going to find brother Su Bai?" "Don't worry." Su Li squatted down and wiped the blood and tears from the corners of Hong Baizhu's eyes. She said gently, "When my injury is fully recovered, I will soon find brother Bai." Hong Baizhu responded with a heavy voice. She immediately raised her head and saw the first elder of the Ling family who was floating over. At this moment, his body was much more solid than at the end of the divine awareness. It seemed that he had gained a lot of benefits from staying with Hong Baizhu. "Young Su Li, my little friend, Have you come to the Chimo Circle? Although the first elder of the Ling family was in Kang Lei's cave, he could see everything that happened in the outside world. Naturally, he knew Su Li's identity. He wanted to respectfully call her Madam of the Young Lord, but he changed his mind when the words were on the tip of his tongue, for fear of making Su Li uncomfortable. However, with this relationship, he did not resist Su Li's proposal at all. Instead, he wanted to help Su Li get through the difficulties. Yes, the space crossing rune played a role. Su Li nodded and accepted it. The first elder of the Ling family covered his chest with fear. It was too risky. Su Li, my little friend, if the teleportation rune failed and you were seriously injured on the spot, you would become the meat in the hands of Bai Mo. Su Li's eyes flashed, and her voice was calm. There is no if in everything. If I don't do it without full confidence, I have died many times. The first elder of the Ling family sighed and said, You are right. Since you have come to the Chimo Circle, you may find a place to practice with all your strength. The Chimo Circle began to decline in the era of the Lord of the Realm. In fact, the Dead Zone is not poisonous, nor is it a foreign invasion, but this circle is coming to an end and aging quickly. This may be an opportunity. The first elder of the Ling family's eyes were full of vigor. I once heard from the Lord of the Realm that the Chimo Circle is coming to an end. Its environment is equivalent to being exposed in the big starry world, without the jurisdiction of any natural law. So, you can practice here without being suppressed by any rules. Su Li, if you have any skills that you haven't finished practicing, you can make good use of this time. Is there such a saying? Su Li was surprised. In the past few days, 80% of her energy was focused on healing, and the remaining 20% was absorbing the pneuma of the Black Lotus. She only practiced Sueyu tactics occasionally, so she really didn't notice this change. After practicing Sueyu tactics for many years, she still stayed in the second Jade Membrane realm. But even so, it made her physical strength improved a lot, and it could shield her from the detection of the natural law to a certain extent. If she could practice to the third, fourth, or even the highest level, even she was looking forward to the effect. Thank you for telling me, First Elder. Su Li thanked him sincerely, and the First Elder was a little embarrassed. Although he understood that Su Li's life was ruined by Bai Mo, his young master also made a lot of sins. He hadn't seen the young Lord Su Buwang yet, and he didn't know whether he inherited the bloodline of the Ling family. After Su Li said goodbye to the First Elder, she came to the island where Su Bai usually lived. Originally, it was just a barren dead place, but under the influence of Su Bai, it became a place full of vitality. In the center of the island, the pneuma of the divine thunder of wood was still very strong. A trace of green thunder entered the body through the pores, giving rise to a feeling of numbness and stimulating the production of new blood. This place was extremely good for her healing. Su Li sat cross-legged, and Sueyu tactics disappeared automatically. Ghost Valley meditation direction suddenly ran, and the energy of the thunder wandering around was suddenly attracted, wrapped Su Li in it, and turned into a green light cluster. She didn't want to use the thunder ability left by Su Bai, but the upcoming unknown danger made her have to take precautions early. Who knew if there was a higher existence in the corpse monster that Li Qing mentioned? At this moment, outside, Li Qing stood in the center of the camp, looking at the sun that was about to rise in the sky, and felt slightly relaxed. The night was probably spent safely. She reached out and touched the universe ring. Seeing the full storage space in it, she sighed softly and issued an order. The rest of the luggage will be divided equally by all the strong young people. The old, the young, the sick and the weak will help each other. She knew that some people would die because they couldn't hold on in this migration, but in order to save everyone, she had to be ruthless. Thinking of this, Li Qing turned her head to look at a dozen warriors on the other side, and her eyes became sharp. Wu Rong, Dai Hechuan, you two will lead the way, and Da Zhuang will lead the other low-level warriors in the middle, and I will bring up the rear, understand? Yes. Everyone shouted in unison. Captain, I will lead the way. Don't worry, I promise to find an absolutely safe place to stay. Wu Rong smiled confidently. Suddenly, she sensed the light of dawn dimming again, and couldn't help but tilt her head to look in the direction of the dead zone in confusion. This time, her usually smiling face was instantly distorted because of fear, and her voice trembled uncontrollably. "Captain, behind." Li Qing's heart thumped, and countless scenes flashed in her mind. Finally, her memory stopped at the moment when the large camp with the honor of Chen Cheng was destroyed many years ago. Her father's heavy sigh faintly sounded in her ears. "The sun doesn't rise every day." Li Qing slowly turned around, and looked at the huge strange shadow that was half a body taller than the wall. Her memory flashed a few days ago, and her lips couldn't help but tremble. Giant corpse. How could it be? Impossible. I clearly set up a concealment rune array, and this is just the periphery of the dead zone. Impossible. Jie jie jie, hey, two completely different voices came out of the giant corpse's mouth. Li Qing then saw a palm-sized monster lying next to the giant corpse's mouth. It was the corpse that had attacked her a few days ago. At this moment, she understood everything. What she had encountered was not an ordinary corpse, but a high-level corpse with intelligence. It was it that had attracted the giant corpse. Li Qing's eyes were red, and she felt a wave of despair. Familiar and painful memories were dug out from the deepest part of her mind by the giant corpse in front of her. They were of the same level, but the giant corpse in front of her was not any weaker than the one that had destroyed her father's camp. Its strength was at least at the 8th level, and her father had been killed by the giant corpse with one slap. She was just a little 7th-level martial artist. What could she do? Chapter 640. You can search for Poisonous Wife on Baidu. You can search for the latest chapter. The corpse monster seemed to enjoy everyone's frightened and sluggish expressions. It was not in a hurry to destroy the camp. It just gently pushed the wall, and the wall collapsed. Rubble rolled down, and some people could not avoid it in time and were directly buried in the rubble. "Run! Run away!" Screams rang out. Many people panicked and ran in all directions. The corpse monster's laughter became more and more cheerful. Li Qing took 2 steps in the opposite direction. Her eyes were red, and she stared at the corpse monster with eyes full of hatred. "I'll cover you. You take everyone and leave." Li Dazhuang's eyes immediately turned red, and he hugged Li Qing's thigh. "No. Sister, you're the only family I have left. Wu Rong. Take him away." Li Qing shouted, and Wu Rong was immediately alerted. She stepped forward, knocked Li Dazhuang out, and casually threw him to Dai Hechuan. Then, she made up her mind and walked to Li Qing's side. Although she had never seen such a huge corpse monster in front of her in her life, she still smiled and showed her white teeth. "How long can you delay it by yourself?" "I'll stay. Dai Hechuan, you'll be the camp leader in the future. You must take everyone out of here alive. Do you hear me? Get out of here." Dai Hechuan's smile was uglier than crying. He looked back 3 times with Li Dazhuang on his back, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and disappeared into the night with Li Dazhuang on his back. The giant corpse was still not in a hurry. Looking at the direction where Dai Hechuan disappeared, the little corpse monster lying next to its mouth showed a strange expression, as if it was smiling. There were only 2 people left in the camp, and the ground was full of supplies that had not been taken away. At this time, Wu Rong was not nervous anymore. She smiled and said, "Captain, I know you have an unusual past, and you've even seen the giant corpse before. Where is its weakness?" Li Qing took a deep breath. She could still vaguely remember that during the catastrophe, an ice-blue figure fell from the sky and instantly froze the giant corpse into an ice sculpture. "Little girl, next time you encounter this kind of giant corpse, just run away. Don't think that I can kill it, it's impossible. But, no one knows what will happen in the future. Who knows if you'll be stupid enough to fight a giant corpse one day? Its weakness is the black area on its chest. The stronger the giant corpse, the smaller the black area. Got it?" Thinking of this, Li Qing was about to say something, but the giant corpse suddenly raised its arm to hit them again. Her pupils shrank, and without saying a word, she hugged Wu Rong and rolled to the side. Rumble. There was a loud noise between heaven and earth as the ground shook violently. Countless materials exploded into powder. An extremely deep crack extended from the giant corpse's feet into the depths of the night. Wu Rong crawled up and stared blankly at the crack that was only a few inches away from her right foot. She couldn't help but shiver. If it weren't for the captain's quick reaction, she would already be a dead person. Puff. Li Qingtsong propped her upper body up and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her heart was filled with despair. She had only been brushed by the aftershock and she had been severely injured. This kind of enemy, how could she defeat them? Is that the giant corpse's Achilles heel? Captain, the Achilles heel is so small. The giant corpse's palm can cover it. Li Qing covered Wu Rong's mouth. Looking at her anxious expression, she took a deep breath. If we don't succeed, we die. If we don't succeed, we die, Wu Rong muttered to herself. Looking up at the approaching giant corpse, the shadow of death gradually shrouded her heart. The hope of success was too small. Li Qing wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and turned around to cover Wu Rong's movements. Seeing the shadow of fear gradually approaching, she emptied her mind. Hundreds of years of life, from childhood to now, kept flashing before her eyes. At this moment, the corpse monster suddenly stopped. Now. Wu Rong suddenly flashed behind Li Qing, raising her hand. A special crossbow arrow shot out from her sleeve. Then with a snap, the corpse monster caught the arrow in its hand, broke it, and threw it to the side. How can this be? Wu Rong suddenly felt cold, her mind blank. Li Qing saw the corpse monster stop. Even if it was provoked by the crossbow arrow, it did not move forward. She couldn't help but feel strange. Suddenly, she noticed that the gaze of the corpse monster was behind her. She couldn't help but look back. At this time, she saw a thin figure standing not far from her. Su Li. Li Qing exclaimed with disbelief in her eyes, "Why didn't you leave with him?" Su Li looked calm. She walked to Li Qing and squinted at the giant corpse. She whispered, "If I leave, I will lose 2 lifesavers." Wu Rong came to her senses and saw Su Li. She looked excited. "But even if you stay, what's the difference between that and death?" Su Li made a decision. She stared at the giant corpse and transmitted the sound. "You said its weakness is the black mark on its chest." Li Qing heard the transmission and finally confirmed that Su Li was not simple. But it didn't mean anything. What's more, Li Qing's worry surfaced in her words. "But your injury?" Before Li Qing finished her words, she saw the figure in front of her suddenly disappeared. She suddenly turned her head, only to see the last scene of Su Li punching the giant corpse. Boom! A huge black shadow was sent flying by a huge force and disappeared in front of the 2 people who were shocked. Then, before the 2 people came to their senses, Su Li had returned to her original place with no expression. She put an isolation inhibition in the bodies of the 2 people and disappeared quickly. It didn't take long for the giant corpse to come again, but its appearance was not the same as the previous one. It was taller, and a palm-sized corpse monster was hanging in its mouth. Looking at the empty camp, the little corpse monster sniffed hard, but it could not sense Li Qing's breath again. Squeak, 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 squeak. After screaming for a while, the little corpse monster had to give up and leave. After Su Li ran for a few miles with Li Qing and Wu Rong, she sensed that the threatening breath behind her disappeared. She was relieved. The injury this time was too serious. It could not be recovered in just a few days. Even with the help of Su Bai's remaining divine thunder, she could only temporarily suppress the injury. That punch was her full strength. If there was another giant corpse, she would also die on the spot. So, she made a prompt decision. After punching the giant corpse with all her strength, she put the inhibition on the 2 people and immediately ran away. After slowing down and putting down the 2 people who were confused, Su Li snorted and couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. She was about to fall down. Su Li. Li Qing quickly held her, grateful and worried. How do you feel?" She was really afraid that Su Li's blow would exhaust her vitality. Su Li resisted the dizziness and squeezed a smile. "I'm fine. The main force is in front of me. This time, run away a little farther, so that I have more time to heal." After saying this, Su Li fainted. Kang Lei's cave was also opened at the same time. If there was really unpredictable danger, Hong Baizhu would also appear to help her. But the rules of Kai Mo Circle changed. According to the first elder of Ling family, if ghosts appeared in the world without rules, they would be seriously injured immediately. This was also the reason why she could only fight alone. Sister, Hong Baizhu stood at the door of Kang Lei's cave, staring at Su Li's sleeping face and clenching her little hands. She had never seen her sister in such a mess. She hoped that she could help at this moment, even, just a little bit. Li Qing helped Su Li wipe the nearest blood, gently carried her on her back, and touched Wu Rong, who was still in a daze. She smiled and said, "Let's go and catch up with Dazhuang and others. We will directly change the route to the nearest hemp camp." Wu Rong was still replaying the scene of Su Li blowing the giant corpse away in her mind. Hearing this, she came to her senses and seemed to know Li Qing again. She exclaimed, "Captain, don't you hate Qiancheng camp the most?" Li Qing sighed and said, "Most of the camp's supplies were lost, and even the rune matrix was not taken. How can we continue to feed people? Moreover, Su Li also needs a safe environment to heal." Speaking of this, Li Qing was silent for a moment and said, "We can't protect her alone." "Yes," Wu Rong replied, "that's great. Su Li said that Dazhuang and others are in front of us. Let's catch up and change the route together." Okay. 10 days later, Su Li woke up slowly, but what she saw was not the familiar camp, but the roof of a wooden house. She lay still and ran the Ghost Valley meditation direction automatically. She had almost healed the recoil injury caused by the bombardment of the giant corpse that day. The injury had been delayed for 10 days, but it did not worsen under her extremely strong physical recovery ability. "Su Li, you finally wake up." At this time, Li Qing came from outside the door with a surprised face. At this moment, she had changed into an ordinary costume and hid her pneuma. On the surface, she only looked like a warrior of the 4th or 5th level. Su Li had a plan in her mind and asked, "Where is this place?" Li Qing put a bowl of steaming broth on Su Li's bed, sat down and said, "Have you heard of Qiancheng camp?" Su Li shook her head. Except for the news she heard from Li Qing and others, she knew nothing else about Qimo Circle. Li Qing smiled and said, "It is not so mysterious. Qiancheng is the large camp you asked me about a few days ago. In this circle, there are dead zones raging. In order to survive, our human clan will naturally produce large human settlements. There are countless large camps in the whole Qimo Circle, but only 1,000 are guarded by strong people. These 1,000 camps of strong people are called Qiancheng. This is a place called Ma Camp." When Li Qing said this, her tone became a little low. "We were delayed on the road for 6 or 7 days. The survivors were dead and dressed up. Finally, only the young people insisted to come here. The camp guards saw that we were not weak, so they all let us go. This is a temporary residence for those who have not yet been verified." Su Li's eyes flashed and she asked, "Verification of ability?" Li Qing nodded and said in a deep voice, "Yes, large camps will not keep idle people. You will be assigned to work according to your ability. Otherwise, how can you support the operation of the camp?" Speaking of this, Li Qing smiled again. "After your injury is healed, you may even be able to compete for the deputy head of the camp. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.